IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast.
Take two.
Take two, because Brian and I were spitting
We
before we
were.
actually ended up going live. And
That was a great intro.
then,
Great intro.
And we realized that something happened with StreamYard where we didn't end up going live. But in Brian's defense,
we hit live and we hit the countdown and it went, and then it never like went fully live. So I'm like in the midst of like this great explanation of why I love this week, and I'll do it again. And Trev's like, I don't think we're live. So our bad, false start on the offense, but we are ready to rock and roll, Trev, here with our show for today.
We're ready to rock and roll here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, there's probably no excuse to not have a pretty good intro to the show, considering we did it about 4 minutes ago. But today we do have an awesome show coming your way, and we already have a lot of awesome content out on the message boards for you guys as well. You can see it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Brian has a bunch of film breakdowns already out on the premium message boards. The Upon for the Review is up there. He has an offensive breakdown about what went well for Notre Dame's offense against Boston College. And then he also has a defensive run game breakdown up on the board as well. So going to want to make sure.
22 minutes is just talking about how dominant Notre Dame's run defense was. Yes. It was awesome. It was fun. It was fun to do. I don't know if the show is awesome. It was awesome doing it. So hope you guys enjoy the show. But that's for premium members only.
Yes, it is. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But we have an awesome show coming your way. Part one of today's show, Brian, we're talking about the Week 10 recap and the games that impacted Notre Dame's playoff chances. We talked about it last Thursday. We're going to give a recap of some of the games that we talked about. We're going to give a quick preview of tonight's rankings, just what's going on, where it's going down, and then some of the different shows that we're going to have on the CFB Nation channel and the Irish Breakdown channel. And then part two, Brian, it is game week for Notre Dame. Notre Dame hosts the Navy midshipmen at night in a night game, which they normally don't kick off at night in the Navy game. But this
I can't remember one. There's been lots of Notre Dame Navy games at home that have ended at night because they've had a lot of November games that are after the time change and such. But I honestly can't remember them ever having a home night game. There's been a couple road game night games. I think 2014 was a night game. The one that they played in Maryland was a night game. But yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember one. And then of course we'll also be live tonight, by the way. So I'll be going live right around 8:00 with the CFB Nation guy. So we're going to go live on CFB Nation. So if you're not a member, make sure, if you're not subscribed there, subscribe there. And then as soon as the show is over, 5-10 minutes afterwards, then we will go live, me, Trev, Vince, on Irish Breakdown. So we'll talk kind of more national on that one. And then a main one, like a Notre Dame focused one, where we'll still honestly share our thoughts on all of it on Irish Breakdown. So this will definitely check those out again tonight too. But yeah, Trev, when it comes to this particular this week, man, I honestly can't remember a Notre Dame Navy night game kicking off. I don't think Notre Dame's ever had, I believe this is also the first time Notre Dame's ever had 3 home night games in a season, because this will be the third night game, because they didn't start. I mean, I think the first Notre Dame night game ever was 1988 against Michigan. And they would have like one a year, and then they've had a couple, several years with 2, but I don't know about 3. And just adds to what really, Trevor, is just a fun week, and it's funny because anyone that's been a fan of the show or subscriber to the show for like more than 5 minutes knows that I have a deep disdain for the triple option. I hate the triple option.
What?
And yes, imagine that. But it's not that it's bad football, or it's just, it's personal for me. I have a lot of different reasons for it, but I hate the triple option. With that being said, this is always one of my favorite weeks. It is. I love Navy week. And there was a time under the Ken Niumatalolo era where I thought Navy was a little bit of a dirty team because of some of the ways I think he coached. They went away from that, and I'm back to kind of loving this rivalry because it's so different. And what I mean by that is this is Notre Dame. I believe Notre Dame has played Navy more than any other team, I believe. And it's a rivalry that means so much more than football. I mean, Notre Dame's dominated this rivalry, and we'll get into that when we get into the series history in a bit. But this isn't a rivalry like, oh my gosh, all the epic games where the winner goes on and wins a national championship. It's not that. It's not. It doesn't have the fun backstory like, Mrs. Rockney wanted to go out west to L.A. and then USC's we'll play anybody anywhere mindset, and the Michigan rivalry, which is really hated because of not only the on-field battles but the anti-Catholic bigotry that led to Notre Dame being kept out of the Big Ten for years, and including back when it was the Western Conference. The rivalry with Michigan State, that's different. There's more of a respect there because Michigan State was an ally to Notre Dame. There's Purdue, that's a geographic rival. Stanford is an academic, scheduling rival. BC, two dueling Catholic institution. There's all these different reasons why you have a rivalry, and this one is so much different. And it's the rivalry that when you truly understand it, you understand why Notre Dame has vowed we will play Navy as long as they want to play us. For however long that they want to play us, we'll play them. We're going to have an article out. I'll publish it tonight. We've published it every year. Andrew McDonough wrote it several years ago. I told him, I said, because Andrew does great research when he writes articles. Great research. He wrote a 4-part breakdown of Notre Dame versus the Big Ten as far as why Notre Dame didn't join the Big Ten, why they're not in the Big Ten now. Great article. But I said, I want you to write an article on the what this rivalry means that's timeless, that we can just republish every year. That's not about this year's matchup or the overall record. And it's basically called, it's a rivalry forged in blood. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, I don't know how you can be a Notre Dame fan and not know and respect history and tradition and this rivalry, and the fact that it's not just about a football rivalry. It's about Notre Dame was able to survive as an institution during a world war in large part because of that relationship with the Naval Academy and what that means. And so absolutely love this rivalry. And then, of course, on the field, do you see Notre Dame, Trev, running down to USC to sing the alma mater with them? Do you see USC returning that favor? Do you see that happening against Stanford or Purdue or Michigan State or Boston? No, it happens in one rivalry. It's against Navy, because there's an incredible respect between the two institutions, and they will battle for 60 minutes between the whistles. And then after the game, there's a level of respect there. And I love the fact that, even Brian Kelly, who I bang for a lot of things, this is the one tradition I don't remember him trying to poo-poo as much as he did some other Notre Dame traditions. It's certainly one that Charlie Weiss embraced, and a lot of past coaches have embraced. And it's a great rivalry. And it's really, this is what makes Notre Dame special, that they have these types of bonds with certain institutions. And that's why I love this rivalry. And that's why I don't care. People, there's Navy gives you nothing. Well, with all due respect, in the last decade, there's been multiple years where Navy was your only ranked win. So you can spare me the whole, they never help you on the field, because they clearly do. They're going to get a chance to play a 7-1 football team this year. That's going to help their strength of schedule. It was one of their ranked wins last year. But beyond that, it's those off the field reasons and knowing what these young men, who they are and what they're going to do. The next time, God forbid, our country gets called to have to go fight, it won't be me fighting it. It won't be you fighting it. Those kids will. Those young men will, by choice. And I have such a great deal of respect for them, for Army, for the Air Force Academy, because they're the ones that make the choice to say, I'm going to stand on this wall, so to speak, right? I'm going to guard this post. I'm going to defend you so that you can go do your podcast talking about Notre Dame football, living in a free country. So I have a great deal of respect for those young men. And that's just knowing the history. It's one of the reasons why I love this week so much. I want to kick their butts on the field and then show them tremendous respect before and after the game.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, when you respect an opponent to the level that Notre Dame and Navy respect each other, you expect to battle on the field. That's what you do to somebody that you respect. So you don't overlook him, no matter the phrase, you throw out records in a rivalry game. And that's true to an extent with the Notre Dame Navy game, but not for the same reasons as why you throw out records for Ohio State, Michigan, or Alabama, Auburn. It's because regardless of whether the team comes into this matchup undefeated or winless, you're going to get the other team's best because you have that mutual respect. because that's what you do. If you're a true competitor, you compete to the highest level no matter who you play against. And that's what I love about this rivalry too. I agree with you completely, Brian. Well, before we take our super deep dive into the Navy Notre Dame rivalry, we do have some big picture college football things to talk about here on the docket today. And it starts with a recap of week 10. And there's about 14 games that we talked about last week that were going to impact Notre Dame's playoff chances one way or another. And, one light, it was a resume builder. And then in others, it was about movement in the polls. And in the AP and the coaches poll, we saw that a little bit because Notre Dame moved up to, I believe, 10 in both of the AP and the coaches poll. So some of the games that we talked about, and we started out with Notre Dame's opponents. And the first one was a noon kickoff, number 10 Miami on the road against SMU. The Mustangs ended up taking care of business in that one, Brian.
Yeah, they did. This is one of those ones, Trev, where I said, look, probably rooting for Miami because Miami helps the strength of schedule. But I said, I think this game could help Notre Dame either way because look, I'm a big proponent that head-to-head matters. Trev, you and I have talked about this plenty of times, but I don't think head-to-head is like the end-all, be-all trump card that no matter what else happens, if your record's the same, the team that won the matchup, head-to-head matchup gets in. I don't believe that to be true. I definitely don't believe that to be true in certain situations at the beginning of the season. Now, sometimes the beginning of the season matters, but you have to look at every team differently. Number one, Notre Dame's starting a first-time quarterback, new D coordinator. Miami had a new D coordinator, new quarterback, veteran quarterback on the road, all these different things. But then it's about, as you get to the end of the year, who's the better team at the end of the year? It may be Miami. It may be Notre Dame. I just felt this is one that really could have gone either way, to be honest with you. And, in this instance, it was a game that I think Miami losing the way they did in overtime, it just showed that they're just not a great team. And coming off of a week when, SMU had just lost to Wake Forest, I'm very curious to see where the committee puts Miami tonight. I don't think Miami should be as low as 18th like they are in the AP and coaches polls. Those are more reactionary to the most recent moments. I don't know if they should be top 12 either. I'm very curious where the committee's going to put them. But I also think Miami's a team that probably drops another game. And I'd rather them drop this one early and then, have a chance to drop another one. And, they're 8, Notre Dame's 10, or they're 6 and Notre Dame's 8. And then Miami loses the last game of the year to a team that Notre Dame beat. Now we have to do that comparison, So I think there's a chance they drop another one. And so the earlier they drop their second, the greater chance that there is they drop a third. So I thought that one obviously went in Notre Dame's favor. The Navy North Texas game did not. Obviously, you needed Navy to win. I think there was a great chance that if Navy wins to go 8-0, they're in the top 25 of the rankings tonight. I don't think there's any doubt. But they got beat, and they got beat handily. North Texas was the better team for 60 minutes in that game, Trev. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, North Texas's pass offense showed to be legitimate against another good group of 5 team. Navy entered that matchup undefeated, 7 straight wins, and it was a good win for the Mean Green. Unfortunately, doesn't mean too much for Navy, but definitely still a lot of season left for them to kind of salvage a little bit of something. Could sneak their way into the rankings if they're competitive against Notre Dame, beat Memphis on the road. Yeah,
right. Because as we'll talk about when we dive into our Navy preview, there's plenty of impressive resume building opportunities for Navy to have before the end of the season. No question about that.
Next game that we talked about was on the CW 3 p.m. kickoff. Number 16 Louisville was on the road against the Virginia Tech Hokies, and the Cardinals came out victors in that one. Right.
Yeah, you wanted to see Virginia Tech win that one. They didn't. So Louisville will be kind of nipping on Notre Dame's heels. I don't think Louisville. There's also the Virginia game at Cal. That one went and didn't go in Notre Dame's favor either, because you do worry about if those teams keep winning and they only have one loss, is there come a time where the committee decides them jump over Notre Dame? I don't think so. If they're not over Notre Dame tonight, I don't think they're going to be over Notre Dame at the end of the year if Notre Dame wins out. I don't think that happens. But stranger things have happened, Trev. I just don't think the committee has a lot of respect for the ACC. I mean, a 10-2 Miami team last year didn't get in. I don't think
a couple years ago.
Last year, the ACC is probably better than it was this year.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. I mean, 2 years ago, their undefeated conference champs didn't make a 14 playoff. I just don't think that the committee views the ACC in very much high regard. Now, one thing that did happen in the ACC this past weekend, Brian, we needed Pitt to handle business on the road against Stanford, a team that hadn't lost at home until this past Saturday when they hosted Pitt. The Panthers ended up coming away with a win. They kicked off at 3:30 this past weekend.
Yeah, you needed Pitt to win, and they won. And I think that I think it's one of those situations, Trev, where we'll find out tonight how much that game mattered. But Pitt's got a bye this weekend, so there's a good chance if they're not in the top 25 of the rankings this week that they will be next week. And then obviously Miami, even if they lose to Notre Dame to drop to, what are they, 7-2 now, right, Trev?
Yes.
If they drop a game to Notre Dame in 2 weeks, which obviously we'll talk a lot about that next week, there's still a good chance they're 9-3. They got to play at Georgia Tech, which is a winnable game for Pitt, because Georgia Tech's a good football team, but their defense has been a problem all year. We've talked about this. They've won, like, you were very high on them coming the year. I was higher on them coming the year. Their offense is pretty good, but there's two things that I don't like. I don't think they use Jamal Haynes properly. They ride Haynes King too much, and their defense has not been good. They very, very miss Tyler Santucci, who was their D coordinator last year. They just haven't been as good on defense. And it's one of those things where I don't think I could see Pitt scoring a lot on Georgia Tech and winning that game. And then, of course, they got a great shot at the end of the year to play Miami. So Pitt, if they're ranked tonight, could still end up being ranked, even if Notre Dame smacks them next week, because of what they have coming up. So it's a chance for Notre Dame to have another top 25 team on their schedule if they can win out outside of the Notre Dame game, certainly. And so them going on the road and beating Stanford. First team to do it, as you mentioned, Trev, all year. Hopefully Notre Dame will be at least second to do that.
At least one of them, man.
Yeah, it's good for Notre Dame.
One of them. One of the former opponents that Notre Dame has already played, the Boise State Broncos, were not able to handle business against Fresno State. And Brian, there's no way around this one. Boise State got dominated in this one, lost to Fresno State 30-7 at home. So that's not great.
It was tough for Notre Dame. They needed Boise to win. There was a chance that Boise, if they kept winning, they have San Diego State coming up. They had a chance to jump into the top 25. And not only to lose to Fresno, to get smashed by Fresno, it's going to be really hard for Boise to jump back in the top 25. It's possible at 9-3 they could get in, but unlikely. It's highly unlikely. And so that certainly hurt Notre Dame's chances for strength of schedule. Now, the way the committee does it is there's top 25 wins, and then there's also quality wins. I've talked about this in the past, wins over teams over 500. And, obviously Boise's still highly likely going to be a team with a winning record. I don't see them losing out the rest of the way. They just had a really bad day. And it's unfortunate because Notre Dame needed them to win and Boise State didn't do their part. They've just got issues, Trevor, in my opinion, when it comes to the quarterback position. Just really limits them. But that's really what it boils down to for me. Like, their starter's not very good. Their backup's not very good, as we saw against Fresno. You know what I mean? And the inability to recruit that position better is concerning to me. Very concerning to me for them.
Yeah, it's one of the very few teams that kind of fall in line with the example of, well, they lost, insert impact player's name here. How good is the offense actually going to be? Well, unfortunately for Boise State, losing Ashton Jeanty was kind of their Achilles heel. He was that offense last year, and it's been pretty evident. Another game that we talked about last week, Brian, number 15, Virginia on the road against the California Bears, and Virginia took care of business as well. Yeah,
talked about this one earlier already. Notre Dame needed Cal to win. Cal couldn't get it done, so that one certainly didn't help Notre Dame. The Georgia Tech NC State game did, though.
Yep, just about to say, man. Number 8, Georgia Tech lost on the road to NC State in a game where NC State's offense came alive against just a not good Georgia Tech defense that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, they really haven't been good on defense all year, Trev. We've talked about this before. I mean, needed overtime to beat Wake Forest, and even some of the games where they kept the points down. They just weren't playing well. Gave up 24 points to Temple, didn't look great on defense against Syracuse. There was a lot of opportunities for Syracuse to make plays that the quarterback just missed. I mean, a lot of opportunities. And CJ Bailey didn't miss. So, I mean, that was a very dominant performance from CJ Bailey in that game. And this is the thing is he's a young kid. He's a young quarterback, just like CJ Carr. I mean, CJ Carr was brilliant against NC State. He was brilliant against Boston College. He was not very good against USC. Young quarterbacks are going to have games like that. And CJ Bailey's in the same grade as CJ Carr. And CJ was in a little bit of a rut, but he came out and absolutely torched Georgia Tech. But it wasn't just that. They ran all over Georgia Tech too. They didn't have Hollywood Smothers and still ran all over Georgia Tech. Jaden Scott went for $196, and CJ added another 34 yards. He had 374 yards of offense and 3 touchdowns. When CJ Bailey plays like that, this NC State team is really hard to beat because they can score a ton of points. And you saw the receiving core in that game too, Trev. There's just a lot of weapons.
Yeah.
A lot of weapons, for them. And Georgia Tech, simply put, doesn't have Notre Dame's defense. They don't have Notre Dame's defensive talent. They couldn't get after CJ Bailey the way that Notre Dame did. And once he got comfortable early, he looked good. So that does twofold. Number one, I think that drops Georgia Tech behind Notre Dame tonight. We'll see. But Georgia Tech's 8-1. I get that, but they have no good wins. I mean, well, they have a couple decent wins, I should say. And the Duke win was a quality win. The Wake Forest win, that's probably their second best win. Wake's 5-3, Temple's 5-4. They beat Clemson, who's 3-5 right now. Like, they don't really have any good wins. And then they finally play a good NC State team on the road and got smacked.
Yeah.
It wasn't a real close game in the second half.
No, it wasn't. I think NC State took it a little personal. FanDuel had Georgia Tech favored by 5.5 points.
In Raleigh. But that's Dave Dorn. We talked about this before the game. Like, he just has those games where his team will show up, and you're like, dude, where's this been all year? And another game where Haynes King carried the ball 20 times. Like, I'll tell you this, Haynes King's not the reason they lost that football game. The only reason it wasn't a 30-point loss is because of Haynes King. Like, that guy's unbelievable right now for this team. And it was basically him versus the entire Georgia Tech team is basically how it went.
Oh, yeah.
But I still say when Jamal Haynes only has 6 carries in a game, you're doing something wrong as an offensive coordinator. Buster Faulkner's star is a little bit dimmed for me this season because of his inability to maximize all the potential that he has on that team. But Notre Dame needed that. So it not only knocks Georgia Tech behind them, but that's a team that Notre Dame beat by 29. Now they're also 5-4 now, much better shot for NC State to finish the year with a winning record. They're 5-4. They got to play at Miami, and then they've got home games against Florida State and North Carolina. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, you want to be a big NC State fan for the rest of the year. Because if they can beat Miami, Florida State, and North Carolina, there's a good shot that an 8-4 Virginia Tech NC State team is going to be ranked. Because they had that little, blip, but that's a team that will have a win over a ranked Virginia team. They'll have a win over a ranked Georgia Tech team, a win over a ranked Miami team, and then had good losses, 3 good quality losses, 2 really good losses, Pitt and Notre Dame. Unlikely that they get in the top 25, but if they're able to beat in consecutive weeks Georgia Tech, Miami, then win out at home, they'll be a ranked team. Best case scenario, 7-5, but that still counts as a quality win under the CFB playoff resume. So that certainly helped Notre Dame. It was going to be tough for them to be above 500 if they didn't beat Georgia Tech this weekend. Real tough.
One team that I'm going to be really interested to see where they fall in the rankings tonight is USC, who picked up a big win on the road against Nebraska. Brian, you and I were all talking after the postgame show on Saturday, and it literally looked like 2 teams that just didn't want to win the game.
Yes.
I mean, you had Nebraska on one hand who struggled beating opponents that are ranked. And then on the other hand, you had USC that struggled traveling anywhere east of, I guess, the California state border in the Big Ten to get wins. And it looked like neither of them wanted to win, but at the end of the day, the Trojans got a big win in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it was big for USC, and of course it was big for Notre Dame. For USC, it's been, and the reason it's big for USC, or the reason why Notre Dame fans should care that it's big for USC, is because I do feel like USC was a very interesting team this year that has talent, but I don't know that they were completely sold that they're a good football team yet. And I know the Michigan game was part of that, but then they kind of got in between that game. They got smacked around a little bit by Illinois and Notre Dame. I think they needed a game like this. And then now hopefully they can kind of get rolling a little bit. They're 6-2 now. I expect them to be inside the top 20 tonight. All the computer models are very high on USC, more so than the voters. And I think when you look at the fact that USC's 2 losses are both very good losses, committee will look at that. 2 points at Illinois, 10 points at Notre Dame in a game where they had a second half lead for, not very long, but they had one for at least a kickoff. It didn't last very long thanks to Denarian Price, but they're going to look at that and say it's a quality loss. They didn't get blown out. And then they're going to look at, they have a big win over Michigan. They have a road win over a 6-3 Nebraska team. You're going to look at USC and say, okay, this is a quality football team. And I think that the committee is going to look at them and say, this is a squad that deserves to be ranked in the top 20. And I think you'll see that tonight. So then if they are ranked in the top 20, Trev, their next 2 games are home against Northwestern, Iowa, and then their last game is home against UCLA. So there's a good chance that gets them to 9 wins. Their only other game is at Oregon. So even if they lose at Oregon, by beating Nebraska and beating Michigan around the Notre Dame loss, there's a much better shot that USC finishes 9-3. As long as they don't get upset at home by Northwestern or Iowa, which could happen because that Iowa defense is legit. I'll be shocked if Northwestern beats them, but that Iowa defense is legit. But USC's been pretty good at home in the Big Ten. I mean, even the loss they had last year in the Big Ten, I think their only home loss last year, Trev, was to Penn State, right? And that was a pretty. Let me look at it real quick. Am I forgetting a game? They lost one at home, one at home, one at home. Yeah, their only 2 losses at home last year were to Notre Dame and Penn State. In the Penn State game, they lost in overtime. They had a big lead early, so they've been good at home the last 2 years. So if they can hold serve at home, they're 9-3, and a 9-3 USC team's finishing in the top 20. That's a very good win for Notre Dame. 10-point win over a top 20 team, in my opinion. Definitely top 25. So, but they needed to go beat Nebraska to make that happen. It's unlikely they are in the top 25 if they don't beat Nebraska this weekend. They don't deserve to be in the top 25. That means they would be 1-3 against decent teams. But now that they have that win over Nebraska, you can say, look, we beat a good Nebraska team on the road. We dominated a top 25 Michigan team at home, and our 2 losses were competitive to good teams. That was a big one for Notre Dame. And it was tough watching that game because you almost don't want to root for USC because you're a Notre Dame fan. But then you're like, but you need to see USC win. And so that certainly helped Notre Dame out.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk national picture and how that affected Notre Dame this weekend. One of the games we talked about was number 9 Vanderbilt on the road against the number 20 Texas Longhorns. And the Longhorns were able to take care of business.
They did. I think that was a big game for Texas. They needed that as a program. For Notre Dame, it was one of those games where Vandy, if they win this game, all they've got left is Auburn, Kentucky, and then at Tennessee. And Trev, you and I have talked about this. We're not high on Tennessee this year. They're not as good as their record showed. They didn't belong to be ranked 14th last week. Oklahoma showed that. But so you look at it, you're like, dude, if they beat Texas, there's a good chance Vanderbilt's going to be ranked. Well, they would deserve to be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. If they're 8-1 coming into this first ranking, Trev, and they've got wins at Virginia Tech, at South Carolina, home against LSU, home against Missouri, and then at Texas, that's a resume that would belong in the top 10 ahead of Notre Dame. By losing to Texas, I don't know that I am in love with their resume overall now in regard to being better than Notre Dame's. But now, so there's a much better shot that Notre Dame's ahead of them by the end of the year. Now, this definitely helps Texas raise up. But the reason that I thought Texas winning was better than Vanderbilt winning is because Texas still has to play at Georgia and home against Texas A&M. So there's a pretty good shot that Texas is going to get that third loss. So this increases the chances that neither one of those teams were ranked ahead of Notre Dame. If Vandy would lose to Tennessee at the end of the year, it's not a given that second loss would have dropped them behind Notre Dame. So I think them losing now certainly helps, and then it increases the chances they get a third loss. So now that result increased the odds that Notre Dame is ahead of both. and definitely increase the odds that Notre Dame ends up being ahead of both at the end of the year when you look at what's left on both of their resumes.
Next game that we talked about was number 5 Georgia playing Florida in a rivalry game, and the Bulldogs were able to pull it out 24-20 in a game that looked a little bit iffy there for a second for Kirby Smart.
It did. It's one of those ones, Trev. You just got to ignore what the records are. Georgia got it done. Georgia's not a pretty team. They're not a sexy team this year, Trev, but props to Coach Smart. He knows how to get that team to win. He does. They do. They had to come from behind to beat Ole Miss. They had to come from behind to beat Tennessee. And then they won in a 4-quarter battle with Florida. It's not sexy, but they're winning, and that's what matters at the end of the day. So that was a missed opportunity for Notre Dame's resume, but Georgia's still got some tough games left.
Another missed opportunity was one that you and I were relatively confident in. I think we both predicted upsets last week. Number 13, Texas Tech on the road at Kansas State, and the Red Raiders pulled away late but ended up handling business.
They did. That was a very good win for Texas Tech. Very good win because people say, well, Kansas State's 4-5. Well, they're a pretty good 4-5 team. Number one, they were also coming off back-to-back wins over good football teams, and beat a Kansas team that had a winning record. Dominated them. They also beat a really good one-loss TCU team. One loss at the time. They've got 2 losses now, obviously, because they lost that game. But beat a pretty good TCU team. That the 2 weeks before that. So, and you're at home, and they're hot. I mean, they're playing good football. And Texas Tech, boy, I tell you what, man, they took it to them a little bit. K-State scored early, long touchdown run by Avery Johnson, and then there was 19 unanswered points by Texas Tech. Kansas State scored to make it 19-14. Texas Tech pulled back ahead 29-14. Kansas State made it 29-20, and Texas Tech scored the last 2 touchdowns. Other than the first drive of the game, or first score of the game, I should say, it's the middle of the first quarter, Texas Tech was clearly the better team and was an impressive win. If I'm putting I'll do this on the board, I'll kind of say, here's what how I think the ranking should be tonight. I think Texas Tech belongs ahead of Notre Dame after the win they had this weekend. I mean, they were far more impressive beating Kansas State than Notre Dame was beating Boston College. They have a better record. They don't have a win that's as good as Notre Dame's win over USC, and they haven't played anybody as good as the 2 teams they lost to. But the Arizona State game, I don't ding them as much because they didn't have their starting quarterback in that game. And they still went on the road and almost won that football game. But that win over Kansas was good. That road blowout win over Utah. They have a road blowout win over a quality Houston team. Texas Tech's a legit good football team. I was not sold on them before the year, but this game this past weekend made me a believer. And now there's that huge game coming up this weekend between them and Boise. But I would have the Red Raiders ahead of Notre Dame tonight. I'd be okay with that, and we'll see if they can continue to keep winning.
South Carolina was also on the road this past weekend playing number 7 Ole Miss. And the Rebels also took care of business this past weekend, but it looked –
yeah.
I think the final score wasn't as indicative of how close that game was for the first couple of quarters, and then Ole Miss pulled away late. That's
who South Carolina is, right? Neither of us had high hopes that this game was going to work out well for Notre Dame. Just because if Ole Miss lost, they'd fall behind Notre Dame, but neither of us had high hopes for that one because South Carolina is just not very good.
Yeah.
Just not very good.
Agreed completely. And then number 18, Oklahoma, was on the road against number 14, Tennessee, and the Sooners ended up taking care of business in that one. I believe, 33-26?
Yes.
Was the final score of that game?
Yep.
Yeah, that game was interesting. It was, on paper, it was a good win for Oklahoma. It was. I think that their win was a little bit of smoke and mirrors because, like we said, like we've been saying all season long, I thought Tennessee was a little suspect. I haven't been high on them at all this season. And even though Oklahoma pulled out the 6-point win, they were penalized 11 times for 104 yards. They threw for 159 yards. John Mateer didn't look great. They went 4 of 10 on third down. I just think that they're neither
great football. They're both solid football teams. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. That was an ugly game. Now, the one thing I will say is Oklahoma's starting to run the ball a little bit better, which is helping them. Xavier Robinson had a 100-yard game. Mateer finally started using Mateer to run a little bit more, and that was able to do it in. But, Tennessee what made them good last year is they had some level of balance. I mean, that was it. That, they could run the ball really well, and not that Nico was a great thrower, but he had good receivers, and he could do some things. But when I look at it, Trev, it's just it was one of those games where I felt that Tennessee was closer to Notre Dame. This win's going to drop them down. Some people have argued that Oklahoma now, has multiple good wins. They've got a big win over Michigan, and they've got a big win now over Tennessee. I don't think either one of those wins mean a whole lot to me. Their two losses are good in that they lost to good teams. They didn't play well in either game. Texas beat them by 17. But they still have to play at Alabama, home against Missouri, and home against LSU. So I don't care if Oklahoma's ranked ahead of Notre Dame tonight. They won't be ranked ahead of Notre Dame next Tuesday when they have to play Alabama this weekend. Next weekend. They're off this weekend. So in 2 weeks, they won't be ranked ahead of Notre Dame because they're not beating Bama. And I don't have high hopes that they're going to beat both Missouri and LSU at the end of the year either. So this was the perfect result because Tennessee has no chance of being ahead of Notre Dame now as long as Notre Dame wins out. And even if Oklahoma's ahead of Notre Dame tonight, which I wouldn't put them ahead of Notre Dame, they definitely won't be ahead of Notre Dame by the end of the year when they lose a couple of these games.
Last game that we talked about, little Big 12 action, Cincinnati was on the road against the Utah Utes, and they handled business out there. Talking about Utah, they won 45-14 in a game that was really never all that close. It was 24-7 going into half.
No. Utah's a very weird team. Some weeks they look like world beaters, and other weeks you're like, who is this team? Like, you just don't know what you're getting from week to week. But they needed that win. I think Cincinnati was proven to be pretenders. We were wanting Utah to win this game because it was unlikely that Cincinnati was going to leap ahead of Notre Dame in the rankings, but you just never know. They go 11-1, get to the Big 12 title game. You just never know. So that's one less team you have to worry about. And that's what that game was about.
Brian, real quick, let's go through and talk about just overall, not just necessarily for Notre Dame, but overall Week 10 impact. Who helped themselves and who kind of hurt themselves after we have this sample size of what games just went down?
Yeah, I think that Miami really hurt themselves.
Yeah,
this weekend, like Miami's they're gonna need to bounce back quickly and really. I mean, now you're in a win or go home mode. I'm curious to see how they're going to be ranked tonight. They've got the big win over Notre Dame. They've got a win over South Florida that doesn't look as good anymore. Their resume's got some really good stuff on it, but how much emphasis do you put on how they're playing at the moment? They've lost 2 of 3. The one game they won was against a bad Stanford team. It was tied 7-7 at halftime. They're just not playing good football. Now they have a shot to get it right, but Miami really hurt themselves this past weekend, Trev. They really needed to come out and perform at a high level. I think you look at the SEC, you had some teams that obviously helped themselves, some teams that hurt themselves. I think Ole Miss is a team that helped themselves too, Trev, because you just never know with that team. But the remainder of their schedule, they had the Citadel, Florida, and Mississippi State. You're like, look, if you can just get past South Carolina, who might be one of the more talented teams you play, got a really good shot to be 11-1 when this is all said and done. And then even if you lose to Mississippi State last game of the year, you still have a pretty good shot of still being in the playoff. You just might lose a home seed. But with that win, I thought they really helped themselves. Texas helped themselves a ton this weekend because the committee's going to look at that game and be like, that was not a 3-point game. Like, Texas was clearly the better team in that game. And I think that's going to help them to where now if Texas wins out, I'm looking at Texas a week ago and be like, dude, I don't think that's a playoff team. Now it's like they went out, they're in the playoffs. And if they went out, the question now is, are they hosting? I don't know that there's much of a doubt about whether or not they're going to be a playoff team now, Trev, because if you look at Texas at the end of the year, now if they win out, they'll have wins. I mean, they hadn't, they'll have wins over Oklahoma, who got helped this weekend. So Texas got helped not just by their win, but then by Oklahoma's win, because now that win over Oklahoma looks way better. Their win over Mississippi State looks way better because now Mississippi State went out and got a win last weekend. They beat Kentucky or Arkansas, went on the road and beat Arkansas. So now they're 5-4. They've got Georgia, Missouri, Ole Miss. They still have an outside shot at making a bowl game. So that helped them, when you talk about the rankings tonight. And then, of course, them beating Vanderbilt helped them a bunch. So I think Texas is at the point now where they've got Georgia, Arkansas, A&M left on their schedule to where if they went out, they're easily in and might even host with the resume they have. So I don't know that any team has had a better weekend than Texas, not just by their own win, but by some other wins that look better now because of what those teams did this past weekend. So I think Texas certainly helped themselves a ton this weekend, Trev. And look, Virginia and Louisville, nice job staying in it with those were two games that I kind of thought, I think they both lose and get knocked out. And I think Virginia Tech fell behind Louisville fell behind 16-7 early and then just steamrolled Virginia Tech. And then Virginia whooped Cal from start to finish. So those are both two really good wins for those ACC teams. And then, of course, stay in the ACC, another team that really hurt themselves is Georgia Tech. They're in a lot of trouble now, in my opinion, when you look at what's left on their schedule. I don't think 10-2 Georgia Tech, not only do they not get in, Trev, I don't think they deserve to be in, to be completely honest with you on that one. Because, what's the resume builder for them? So let's say they lose to Georgia. What's their resume builder? Beating Pitt as their best win? Is Duke their best win? You lost badly to NC State. If Florida wasn't a bowl team, it wasn't a playoff team last year, I have a hard time seeing Georgia Tech at 10-2 getting in. So they got to win out now. They got to beat Georgia and beat Pitt, and if they want to get in the playoff, in my opinion, outside of still getting to the ACC title game and win the ACC. We're talking at large at this point in time.
Yeah, you and I see Georgia Tech the same. It's unfortunate that just one game, put a team on the, essentially you're on the fast track to the playoff to now it's kind of need some other things to happen. Georgia Tech is still in control of their destiny. And I know that you agree with that as well, but it's now just the road looks a lot more because if you would have handled business against NC State, you could have suffered an out-of-conference loss to Georgia at the end of the season, went on to play for the ACC championship game and still got in as an at-large bid, even if you didn't win the conference. So now it's just –
Correct. Because I don't know that right now, if Georgia wins out and they go 11-1 and play in the ACC championship game, they're probably going to be in even if they lose that game. Because they will have beaten Georgia. I just don't think they're going to beat Georgia. So, and I don't know they're going to beat Pitt. But I sure do like watching. I mean, I like watching Haynes King play, but I also don't like watching Haynes King play. Because I'm like, you guys are abusing that poor kid. But then you're just like, what a warrior.
For what he means to his team, Haynes King is a top quarterback in college football.
If you're talking MVP, Trev, you could definitely make that argument.
Yeah.
There's no quarterback that if you take him off the team, they're more negatively impacted than, in my opinion, than Haynes King.
Nope. We see that the exact same. Maybe IU with Fernando Mendoza. I don't really know what their backup situation is looking like. I think it's his brother.
I mean, they've dominated games where he doesn't really do anything.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They're so good around him. You take Haynes King off that team and they've got nothing else because they don't know how to use Jamal Haynes. They've built their entire operation around him being the focal point. Mm-hmm. It's almost, it's borderline single wing. It really is, Trev, the way that they're running it. So they had a really rough weekend. And it was Big 12 overall, I think, was somewhat helped this weekend by Texas Tech. There's a much better shot of them being a two-bid league now with Texas Tech winning this weekend. It's still going to be tough just because at the end of the day, can BYU get in with a loss? If they have one loss, it's going to be tough because their non-conference was so soft. And they played Portland State, Stanford, and East Carolina. They'll have some good conference wins. If let's say they lose to Texas Tech next weekend, they'll still get to play Cincinnati. So have wins over TCU, UCF, Iowa State, Utah. But how good are all those wins going to look at the end of the year? I'm very curious to see where BYU is tonight. We'll find out how the committee views those wins tonight.
Sure will. And I'm excited that we won't have to wait that much longer to find out. You and I were talking, I think, last week, kind of how we felt in the preseason. I'm done with the speculation. I just want to see what the rankings are to kind of move forward and have that be our talking point. And so, Brian, to wrap up this segment, let's talk about it real quick. Just, rankings come out tonight. I believe the show starts at 8 p.m. That's when you said you're going live on the CFP
we'll go
Nation.
live probably a few minutes before that just to kind of preview the rankings and all that. And then we'll just kind of, as they're released, we'll be talking about them. So if you guys want to mute the TV and watch the release and then listen to us kind of evaluate it all, we'll do it. And then the CFP, that'll be on CFP Nation. So make sure you're subscribed to the CFP Nation channel. It'll be me, Bill Bender, and Bill Troche. And we'll just kind of, as we go through it, we'll talk about Notre Dame as we talk about every other team. But then you and Vince will go live right after that. We'll spend a lot of time talking about Notre Dame and then also talk about our overall thoughts as well.
I can't wait for it. I'm very excited to dive into that. Well, to kind of tie a bow on this segment here, Brian, where do you think Notre Dame is going to be ranked tonight?
I think between 10 and 12 is where I expect them to be tonight. When I look at the top 25, there's a couple teams I'm very curious what the committee's going to do with those teams. I expect Ohio State, Indiana, and A&M to be 1, 2, 3. I wouldn't be shocked if, Georgia, Bama, 4, 5, kind of like the AP poll. After that, it gets a little bit, I'm curious what they're going to do. Both rankings have Oregon number 6. But my answer for Oregon is, why are they number 6? Right now, their biggest win is over Northwestern. Their second best win so far, literally their second best win so far is over Rutgers. That's their biggest win right now. They played one good team and got beat. And honestly, that team didn't even play that well and beat them. So I'm very curious where Oregon's going to rank tonight. Because honestly, I would drop them way. They have not looked like a top 10 team to me. We've been telling people, guys, this is not last year's Oregon team. Where are they going to be ranked tonight relative to Ole Miss, BYU, and Texas Tech? I would have Oregon behind all those teams. They all have better wins than Oregon does. And Oregon has blowout wins over bad teams. Great. They blew out a terrible Oklahoma State team. Wonderful. Good for you. You blew out a terrible Oregon State team. You blew out a terrible Rutgers team. You didn't even blow out a bad, Wisconsin team. And so you look at Rutgers and you're just like, dude, they're a last second field goal away from being even worse, from losing to Purdue. They're 4 wins this year over Ohio by 3, Miami of Ohio, Norfolk State, and they needed a walk-off field goal to beat Purdue. And great, Oregon whooped them. They haven't beat anybody. Whereas you look at Texas Tech, they went on the road and beat what I think is a good top 25 Utah team soundly. Just went on the road and beat a talented but underachieving Kansas State team soundly. They went on the road to beat a quality, well-coached Houston team soundly. Why isn't Oregon ahead of Texas? Why is Oregon ahead of Texas Tech other than they're Oregon? Now, Oregon can also then move their way up because they've got still USC on the schedule. They've got Iowa on the schedule. But where are they tonight? I'm very much curious to see that one. Where's Texas Tech ranked tonight? That's another one. So those are all interesting ones that I'm looking at, Trev. And then, when it comes to Notre Dame, I think it comes down to where does Notre Dame rank relative to, Oklahoma, Virginia, teams like that. I don't think Oklahoma is going to be ahead of Notre Dame. If I had to predict today, I'd say probably 10th. But I could see them putting one of the ACC or Texas or Oklahoma ahead of them just because of the perceived, big win that Oklahoma had. But why are we assuming that Tennessee is going to be ranked with 3 losses? Why is Tennessee going to be a top 25 team? There's a lot of 2-loss teams in the also receiving votes that are way more deserving of Tennessee than being in the top 25. So then, their whole resume is built around what? If Tennessee's not ranked tonight, this is why I don't think they deserve to be in. So their biggest win is most likely going to be over Michigan. And Michigan's a team that went on the road and lost to USC convincingly. Notre Dame played USC, dominated USC. I think USC is going to be several spots ahead of Michigan tonight. And so I think Notre Dame's got the better win. You could argue that Oklahoma has the better second win over Tennessee. Notre Dame's second best win right now is probably NC State or Boise State. I would give them that. But the rest of their wins are over Illinois State, Temple, a 7-point win over an Auburn team that just fired their coach, Kent State, and a South Carolina team that's 3-6. So I don't think Oklahoma has a resume that's better than Notre Dame's, but we know that the SEC bias is a real thing. So I could maybe see Oklahoma being ahead of them, but I think 10. I think they're behind BYU and Texas Tech. They belong behind BYU, Texas Tech. They're behind Ole Miss. They're probably behind Oregon. I don't think either one of the 1-loss ACC teams will be ahead of Notre Dame. I could see the committee doing that. I just don't think they belong ahead of them. So if I had to say specifically, I'd say 10, but I could see them being 11. I'll be a little surprised if they're 12.
I think Notre Dame's going to be 10th. I think the committee has shown relative, I don't want to say favoritism to Notre Dame, but they always look at Notre Dame higher than even some of we think. That, look, the Boston College game was extremely frustrating, and it did not look like what it should have looked like. I absolutely recognize that. I'm going to be very curious to see how the committee views it and views that win. Do they look at it the way that we do, or do they look at it the way that's like, okay, so Notre Dame played, for the most part, really inconsistently. They went 3 of 10 on third down, missed 2 extra points, a field goal, fumbled on the 5-yard line, and still held Boston College to under 40 team rushing yards, 10 total points, and had 3 interceptions. Or is it somewhere in between? Yeah, how do they look at this Notre Dame team after their last sample size was just kind of I'm going to be very curious to see where they put Notre Dame. I think that they're going to be 10th. I think they remain the highest 2-loss team in the country in tonight's rankings. So that's where I would put them. Brian, I'm with you. If I had to pick a solid spot, it's 10th.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I have them.
Which would be where they were last year when the rankings first came out.
Yep.
And they finished 5th. Because I think some people forget that Notre Dame was actually 5th in last year's playoff rankings.
Yeah.
They were seeded 7th, but they were ranked 5th. And that's because last year, the 4 highest ranked conference champions got the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds. So the seeding wasn't the same as the ranking. This year, there basically is no seeding. The seeding is the ranking. The ranking is the seeding. Einhorn is Finkel. Finkel is Einhorn, right? They're the same thing, right? So if they're set 5th last year, if the seeding was the same way it was last year, Notre Dame's the 5 seed, and they would have played Clemson in the first round. And then they would have played Penn State in the second round. So they still would have got the Nittany Lions no matter what. But so they went from 10 to 5. That's why I'm still confident they're going to be a home team, because if they're 10, like we think, Trev, the 2 teams that I expect to be right ahead of them play each other next weekend. And I think Notre Dame needed a lot to go their way this past weekend, and a lot of it did. And there's just been a game here, a game here, a game here, a game here that's really helped them really the last 3 weeks. So that's kind of where I'm at. And then the other thing is, and I do think this is interesting, is what do they do with Miami? That's the one that's really interesting, because the voters are very down on Miami right now. And I get it if we're doing recency bias, but the committee supposedly just looks at your total resume. And if you look at Miami's total resume, they're 6-2 right now. They've got wins over what I believe to be a top 10-ish Notre Dame team. They have a win over a quality win over a 6-2 South Florida team, whose only losses are going to be to Miami and on the road to Memphis, who I think will be ranked tonight. They'll also have a win over Florida. So there's some decent wins there for Miami. Their losses aren't very good. Louisville's going to be a good loss. Now, it's not, neither of their losses are as good as the Notre Dame losses, but I don't know that a resume should be built. So how much do they value that head-to-head win over Notre Dame all the way back in week 1? I don't know. We're going to find out that answer tonight. So if they're 12, Trev, it's because, in my opinion, it's because Oklahoma and Miami are ahead of them. That's what I think.
Also, last note from me on this, and I know we'll talk about it later tonight. We'd be interested to see what the committee does with Pitt. They're not going to be in the playoff conversation, but I'm going to be very curious to see if they rank Pitt, because they're 7-2 right now and have a bye week. And some of the bottom teams in the top 25, you could argue that in the AP top 25, you can argue that Pitt should be above some of those teams. So
100%. They should definitely be ahead of Tennessee. Not even a question mark.
Yep.
They should be ahead of Tennessee. I mean, Trev, looking at the AP top 25, what's the justification for Cincinnati being ranked ahead of Pitt right now? What's the justification for Missouri to be ranked ahead of Pitt right now? They got better losses. Who have they beat this year? Their best wins over what? South Kansas? So it's yeah. I'm definitely Tennessee. Washington, I think, is a team that belongs in the conversation of being ranked. But what's, should they be ahead of Pitt? I don't know. And that's going to tell us too, is how do they look at Pitt? Do they just look at Pitt on the season, or do they look at Pitt and make a comment that, look, they changed quarterbacks after their second loss, and since then they've steamrolled everybody.
Yeah.
how do they look at that? It's going to be interesting to see what they do with Pitt as well, Trev. You are absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for part one of today's show, but don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to take a deep dive into Notre Dame's opponent this upcoming weekend, the Navy Midshipmen. But before we get up there, make sure that you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation channel. Like Brian mentioned, he's going live with Bill Bender and Bill Trocchi tonight when the playoff ranking show goes live. And I believe Bill Bender and Bill Trocchi have a show up that was
already published.
Already up there. And then Vince and I I think Jesse Stiers and I are going live this Thursday on the spread option, Thursday night
out of town,
at 8 p.m. So make sure you are subscribed to that channel as well. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part two of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're talking Notre Dame versus Navy. And I know we talked in the opening of the show about what this rivalry means for Notre Dame fans. Before we dive into the X's and the O's and who's winning this series and who's doing what, this is a very meaningful rivalry for Notre Dame. And I do still think that there's some Notre Dame fans out there that just don't really understand why. And there's a lot of meaning as to why they continue to play every single year.
And this will be, if my calculation is correct, Trev, this will be the 98th meeting between Notre Dame and Navy. Notre Dame holds the record 83-13-1. The official record is 81-13-1, but they don't count the 12-13 wins because of that nonsense. I still do. This isn't a rivalry that's there because of a back and forth affair. It's not that kind of rivalry. Navy won 3 out of 4 years at the end of the Charlie Weiss, beginning of the Brian Kelly era. I just find it funny that Notre Dame's all-time winningest coach has 2 losses to Navy. So like in a 10-year span from 07 to 16, they won 4 games. That's so in the previous, their first game was played in 1927. Navy didn't win a whole lot of games during that time. And what's funny is the Navy's had 4 of their 13 wins. 4 times they've won back-to-back on Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame in 1932 and 1933 and in 36, so they won 3 out of 4. They won in 1944 during the war, so they actually still played Notre Dame during the war. Notre Dame won 2 of those, tied 1, and then Navy won in 1944. And then Notre Dame won the next 10, and then Navy won 4 out of 6 in the 50s and early 60s. They won back-to-back in 56 and 57, and then Notre Dame won back-to-back in 58 and 59. And then Navy won 3 out of 4 again. They won in 60, 61, and then 63. That's when Notre Dame began their 43-year win streak over Navy, and really dominated them. So, and it'd be right to point out that what helped Navy win those games in the early 60s was this kid named Roger Staubach, who was the quarterback when they beat Notre Dame 35-14 in 1963. So that helped them a little bit. And then Notre Dame won 43 in a row, didn't lose again until 2007. If you remember that overtime game in 2007,
sure
and they won 3 out of 4. And then Notre Dame won their next 5. And then Navy won again in 2016. And then Notre Dame has won the last 7 meetings between these 2 teams.
Yeah, that
all
Navy
but 2 by double digits.
Yeah, that Navy 2007 game was a game that I thought Duval Kamara was about to be the next Jeff Samardzija.
Yes.
That was that game. I remember that. I unfortunately do remember that game. Yeah.
That was a wild game. And then Navy beat him in 2009.
Yep.
And then 2010 was the absolute beatdown that they took. That was the one game where Navy just whooped Notre Dame. I mean, the other games were close. They lost by a point. Navy scored at the end of the game by a point. The 2009 game was close. They lost by 2. The 2007 game went to overtime. But 2010, they got smacked by Navy. Alexander Teach going off, Ricky Dobbs going off, Notre Dame, Brian Kelly. We weren't prepared for the veer. You remember that at halftime? We weren't prepared for the beer. That was an absolute beatdown. But Notre Dame did get back on track that next year. They won the next 2 years. Notre Dame won 56-14 and 50-10. They had a competitive 4-point win. You remember Jalen Smith made a huge stop into that game. Navy had a comeback. 2014, they won 49-39. Notre Dame had a big lead at halftime. Navy came back a little bit in the second half. won 41-24 in 2015. And then Notre Dame lost in 2016. And then the 2017 game was a weird game. They had just lost to Miami. That team didn't want to be out there. They had the old Newt Rockne uniforms. Remember that uniform combo?
Yeah,
the old brown. That was terrible. It was one of my least favorite alternate uniforms. Those were terrible. Won 24-17, and then the next 3 years were blowouts. They were blowing Navy out at halftime in 2022, and Navy had that crazy second half comeback. And then last 2 years, Notre Dame's won 42-3 and 51-14. So they've reestablished dominance in this series, but you got to keep that going because this is a good Navy team, Trev. But it's just a rivalry that you have to understand goes so far beyond the games we just talked about. And it goes so far beyond, it's just not about football only. And that's what I love about this rivalry is to understand who these young men are, what this rivalry means, why they still play this game, and why Notre Dame has vowed that they will always play this game. And like I said, we won't dive too much into that here, but we'll have that article out later today, and that Andrew McDonough wrote. It's a great feature, but it basically comes down to, Navy stepped up to help Notre Dame, who was already a rival. I mean, when this happened, when the war started, obviously for us, it started on December 7th of 1941 is ultimately when it started for us when Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Empire of Japan. But even before that, they had played every year since 1927. So, I mean, that was a decade-plus long rivalry already. And at that time, Notre Dame had won 5 of 6, 4 or 5. So it was a great moment and a great partnership. And obviously, since then, they've played a lot of great. I mean, there's been Notre Dame players that have then gone to join the Navy. Obviously not going to the Naval Academy, but joined the Navy. Notre Dame recently had a kid who was in the Naval Academy, came to Notre Dame, and Alohi Gilman, who started as a freshman on that 16 team that beat Notre Dame. Obviously transferred to Notre Dame, became a captain, great player for Notre Dame, but I just absolutely love this rivalry, Trev, and respect the heck out of this rivalry. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's a game you got to win, but what troubles me, Trevor, is I noticed, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I'm noticing a lot more younger people that just refuse to say, I don't care about all that. They should stop playing Navy. And I really hope that never becomes the prominent theme amongst Notre Dame fans.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the younger generation that just they look at the Navy game the way that ESPN and other talking heads want you to look at the Navy game. And that's the unfortunate side of it. It's the same talking heads that are okay with the SEC playing the Citadel in the second to last week of the season because their schedules are just so grueling. Those are the same talking heads that are okay with teams like Penn State starting their season against FIU, Villanova, and Nevada because their in-season schedule is just so grueling. And I don't pay too much attention to it. You said something earlier in the show that I think is really, really important to hit on. If you're a Notre Dame fan, you have to have some level of respect for tradition. In one hand, you can't be super upset that the Notre Dame-USC rivalry is going away and then also be questioned as to why Notre Dame plays Navy on an annual basis. You can't have both, in my eyes. One of the things that I love about Notre Dame is that it's rich in tradition. Sounds corny, but you can feel it when you walk on campus on game days. You feel it when you go inside of the stadium. You feel it when you go inside. And that's something that not a lot of other college football programs have. There's a very minute few that can share that. And the Notre Dame Navy rivalry feeds into that. It does. And for the meaning, and I'm excited to read Andrew McDonough's article like I do every single year when it comes out as to why that this rivalry continues to get played. But it's not, honestly, it's not even about just the tradition at Notre Dame. It's it's a part of U.S. history. Notre Dame is one of the most long-lasting and prestigious institutions in the country. And Navy's a big reason as to why it's still a thing. And not enough people know that. And that's really disheartening. Now, I am of the crowd that I do think, and I think Notre Dame would benefit from playing some more difficult opponents down the stretch. Some of it you can't control. Florida State was not supposed to be this bad last November when Notre Dame won 52-3. There's some stuff that you just can't control. Just like Ohio State can't control Penn State being in their schedule. You know what I mean? Like
there's a while there where if you could beat Stanford at the end of the year, that was a huge resume builder. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I am a proponent of, hey, maybe they don't play Syracuse and they fill that with like a middle tier, but don't get rid of Navy. Because then it gets into, okay, if the Navy rivalry isn't good anymore and the USC rivalry isn't good standing anymore, then why even have rivalries in college football? Notre Dame should just play whoever. Like Notre Dame should just play Nevada one week and then Texas Tech the next week and then play Maine the next week and then play Ohio State the next week. And like that's not why you love Notre Dame.
It's not why you should love college sports at all or any sports at all. Sports thrives off the rivalries, the passion. Yep. I just want to read a couple excerpts from Andrew's article for people. So he begins with kind of talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then obviously some of the struggles that the Navy suffered, because it wasn't like in a lot of Americans' minds it was Pearl Harbor and then we punched back with Midway. There was losses before Midway happened, and he talks about how the struggle for the Naval Academy, but then the struggles back home. And here's a little bit of what he says. He goes, however, those sacrifices did not always mean going without or using less. Some had significant financial ramifications as well. One small Catholic all-male college in northern Indiana found itself in dire financial straits in 1942, with enrollment plunging more than 20% from its pre-war levels, with virtually the only students on campus either 17-year-old freshmen too young for the draft or those with physical limitations making them unable to serve in the military. Notre Dame President Reverend Hugh O'Donnell needed to come up with a creative solution to boost enrollment and keep the doors of the university open. And then later he says, he goes, with that in mind, and he talks about the history of them. He says, with that in mind, Reverend O'Donnell reached out to the U.S. military leadership and offered them the use of the university facilities for training. The Army declined, but the Navy eagerly accepted. And when he talks about there's a long history of Notre Dame and war and the military going back to the Civil War. And here's a couple excerpts from that. He goes, when asked to protect the Union of their adopted homeland during the Civil War, tens of thousands of Irishmen answered the call. Inspired by Father William Corby, who had later become president of the University of Notre Dame, the famed Irish Brigade, allegedly nicknamed the Fighting 69th by none other than Robert E. Lee himself, distinguished itself in battle, most notably at Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg, all while suffering heavy casualties. At Antietam alone, the Irish Brigade suffered a 60% casualty rate. A statue of Father William Corby offering general absolution to the Irish Brigade of Gettysburg stands on Notre Dame's campus, while an exact copy stands at Gettysburg on the cemetery bridge. He then goes and talks about by the time that World War I rolled around, most Notre Dame students were required to undergo at least some military training, and Notre Dame was granted the privilege of hosting a student Army Training Corps branch on campus. He says is the precursor to the ROTC. Said Notre Dame, this is, again, keep in mind, Notre Dame was an all-male institution for a long time. Notre Dame would send 2,200 students to fight in World War I, and 46 of those young men would give their lives. Their names are immortalized in the God Country Notre Dame monument over the eastern entrance of the Basilica of Notre Dame, which was dedicated by university president Father Matthew Walsh in 1924. And it goes on to talk about World War I, World War II. He goes, in the period after World War I, Notre Dame athletes and students would demonstrate that fighting spirit whenever confronted. Irish teams traversed the country to play anyone, anywhere, while racking up 3 national titles between 1924 and 1930 under legendary coach Knute Rockne. Also, Irish students took a stand of their own, famously disrupting a Ku Klux Klan rally planned for South Bend in 1924 and forcing the Klan to cancel the second rally. The stand by Notre Dame students against the KKK while the Klan was at the height of its powers was the beginning of the end to its hold on Indiana. Just a few years later, in 1927, Notre Dame president Father Matthew Walsh would officially adopt the Fighting Irish as the nickname of the university athletic teams. So this stuff goes back a long time. And it's literally ingrained in the DNA of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And so that's what leads into the offer for the military to use Notre Dame's facilities because, and again, that's kept Notre Dame afloat financially. And they weren't the institution that we know today. Football wasn't driving millions of dollars of revenue into the institution back then like it was now. And so I'll have the full story out, but it basically came down to Navy started what's called the V7 program. Navy paid Notre Dame $487,000 and then a monthly stipend for every enrollee. That's $7.7 million in today's dollars. And this is what Andrew put, this is 5 years ago. And so then they had a V12 program that built on that. So he goes down and explains it all. He has a quote from Loose Emoji in there as well. So I think people need to understand all of that to understand why that relationship even formed during World War I. It wasn't just we needed students, we offered, they took it, wonderful. There's decades of history between Notre Dame. They played Army all the time. They played Navy all the time. And as an all-boys school, an all-men's school, or as a friend of mine who I used to joke with him, he went to Wabash, which is an all-boys school. He would get real mad if you called it an all-boys school. He's like, it's a college for men. I was like, okay, all boys, right? But anyway, I mean, 22. Think about that. Think about that in today's terms. If 2,200 Notre Dame students were drafted to go fight in a war, some of those guys are going to be football players or basketball players. Think about that. 2,200 drafted and fought in World War I, and 46 died. Notre Dame players in World War I were drafted and fought. Heisman Trophy winners fought in World War II, left, not playing football for a couple years, and went and fought in World War II. Frank Leahy served during World War II, which is why he didn't coach for 2 years. So this relationship between Notre Dame and Navy is more than just we let them use our facilities for a couple years. And I think if more people understood that, you would have fewer and fewer people that would make the case that, no, we've paid our debt. There's no debt paid, right? When it comes to your survival, you know what I mean? Like, no, because you wouldn't be a thing ever if it wasn't for them. And so I think that means something to me, and that's why this rivalry means something to me. And I hope that people always remember that.
Yeah, because not all rivalries have to be they don't like us, we don't like them. They don't know. And this is coming from somebody that wants Michigan back on the schedule every single year because it's a I don't like them and they don't like us type of deal. You know, but you need a healthy balance of both. And then as much as I agree, Brian, with, you know, the you need a balance in the schedules. From a football standpoint, outside of the football aspect, I respect Navy as much as I respect any other institution, if not more, especially for what they did for Notre Dame as an institution. But then when you look at it from a football standpoint, Brian, all Notre Dame fans want are some quote unquote easier wins on the schedule, you know, to help bolster Notre Dame so they don't have to prepare for Alabama and Texas and Ohio State, Miami and Texas A&M and every single week. With all due respect to Navy, you have a 83-13-1 all-time record over the midshipmen. Why get rid of that one? You know, I'd be okay never seeing Notre Dame play Syracuse. I would. Like, there are other opponents that you just don't have to schedule to maintain your long-standing relationship with Navy. It's considered the longest continuous intersectional, had to make sure I got that right this time, longest continuous intersectional rivalry in college football. And I don't think that should be something that just goes away that quickly. And that's just me. And
agreed. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, I want them to have easier games than Navy. Like if Navy's keeping you from the playoffs, then you're not a playoff team. Then the other one is, well, you know, Navy doesn't do anything for them. As I've said before, in the playoff era, there have been multiple years where Notre Dame's only ranked win or one of their few ranked wins was over Navy. So they've beaten a ranked Navy team multiple times during that rivalry period. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's like people want to have it they kind of want to have it both ways, and you can't have it both ways. Or they'll say, well, I just don't want to have to play the triple option. Like, okay. I mean, again, what kind of team are you? If you wanted to say, listen, we're going to play this game, beginning of the year, every year, fine, whatever. That's, like, I think there's some cool features to that. Sure. That's fine. If you wanted to have it on a particular time every year, that's fine. I don't mind it moving around, to be completely honest with you. But I'd be willing to kind of move this one more so than the USC one, because this game's never had a specific time, that was mentioned to it. So this is another year where, and again, somebody said Notre Dame risks knee and leg injuries against the Navy. No, they don't, because the rules have changed. Like, that used to be a somewhat legitimate thing. It's not anymore. You can't cut blocking like that anymore. The things that would supposedly cost Notre Dame leg and knee injuries, which is always overhyped, you can't cut like that anymore. So it doesn't really matter anyway. You haven't seen a bunch of Notre Dame players going down with leg injuries against Navy the last few years because the rules have changed. So just a lot of the things that people use, well, you shouldn't play this game anymore, they just don't mean a whole lot to me. And I think that says more about you than it does what this rivalry is. I think this rivalry matters a lot, Trev. Yeah. It really does. It really does. And I think that Navy having success against Notre Dame recently scares some people off. But at the same time, I think for people like me, adds more validation to it being a rivalry. Because if let's say they didn't have that stretch there from 07 to 16 and they won all 5 of those games. And we're now talking about 60 some game winning streak. You'd get to the point in time you're like, okay. It's not that the rivalry doesn't mean anything to me. It does, but there's millions and millions of dollars at stake here. And this team you just beat up every year, and it's like a throwaway game. I say, well, so what? It's no different than the SEC teams playing FCS opponents every year before the rivalry week. So, but I say, okay, I would kind of be more sympathetic to that. But in the last 15 years, Navy's won this game 5 times. Now, it actually, it'd be a little bit more than that. It'd be 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. In the last 18 years, Navy's won this game 5 times. That's not that much fewer than USC. Think about that. From 07 to 2024, USC beat Notre Dame 8 times. No, hold on a second. So 7, 8, 9, 11, 13, 14, 16, and 22. Correct? So from 07 to 2024, USC's beaten Notre Dame 7 times. Navy's beaten Notre Dame 5 times. Not a big difference. You know what I mean? And in recent years, Navy's been ranked almost as many times when they've played as what USC has been ranked. That won't be the case this year because of the loss last week. So I just think that this is a game to me that still means something on the field and certainly means something off the field. And I think Navy's resurgence helps in the people that want to keep it going. It helps because in reality, more often than not, the last 15 years, this game has helped Notre Dame's resume, especially now that Navy's in a G5 league, because they're in a G5 league where they're not just going out and beating up on FCS teams and bad teams all the time. They have to play South Florida and Memphis and teams like that. So I think that certainly helps their resume, Trev, when you look at this rivalry.
I do too. Well, I'm excited to watch it go down. I mean, this kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Saturday night inside of Notre Dame Stadium. You can watch it on NBC or Peacock. And right now, Notre Dame is favored by – the line is actually moved now on FanDuel. Notre Dame is now favored by 26.5 points.
So it's gone up. Okay, interesting. Trev, the recent history has been a little fascinating because I think last year's game gave Notre Dame fans a little bit of a false sense of how much better they are than Navy. And I felt like that game, Notre Dame dominated offensively. But that game early on, Navy shot themselves in the foot a lot in ways that didn't really they weren't really about Notre Dame. Like 2 of their turnovers were just dudes dropping balls. It wasn't about Notre Dame doing anything. Now, Notre Dame players did a good job of being in a position to recover fumbles. But remember first half, Blake Horvath had 2 huge plays in that game. They just put the ball on the ground. I mean, just dropped the ball twice. But I look at it and I say, I think when you look at the recent results, it's been weird, because Navy has been so up and down. There's been years where beating Navy means a really good win over a really ranked, good team. Like 2019, game that Notre Dame won 52-20. People forget that's the only ranked team that Notre Dame beat all year. That's the only team that finished the year in the top 25 that Notre Dame beat all year. And I believe that did Navy finish last year ranked? I can't remember. I think they did. Let me go look at this real quick. Because they lost to Notre Dame and knocked them out, but then they beat Army, who was ranked high, and then they didn't finish ranked, which they should have. That's BS. But they lost to Rice and Tulane, and then beat Army and Oklahoma to end the season to finish 10-3. So they were unranked, but they were ranked 24th when these two teams played last season. So it really the recent games have been interesting because you're now also in the Brian Newberry era. The end of the Ken Niumatalolo era was disappointing because like they you know what it is, Trev? I don't think they ever truly recovered from the COVID season. They were hurt worse than any other program during the COVID season because of the fact they just weren't some college. They're part of the United States government, United States military. They oversee it, and it's just like the way that they had to change how they practice and all those type of things. I just don't know that Navy ever recovered from that. I don't think that Ken Niumatalolo's era ever recovered from that because going into that year, they were rolling. They were coming off an 11-2 year. That came after a 3-10 season, but before that, they were 8 wins, 9 wins, 8 wins, 11 wins, 9 wins, 7 wins. Then they had that weird 3-2 year, and then they came out in 2019 with I think Malcolm Perry was Malcolm Perry their quarterback in 2019, or was he was their quarterback in 2018? I remember that, but I can't remember. I don't think he was their quarterback in 2019. I'm actually going to look right now. He was, that was the year he rushed for 2,000 yards. He was really good that year. They had Keenan Reynolds before that. So, like, they had some really good Navy teams under Ken Niumatalolo. And from 2008 until 2016, they won at least 8 games every season. And then, obviously, things kind of fell off the rails. COVID, they went 3-7. Next 2 years, they went 4-8, and they just never recovered. And then Brian Newberry comes along in 2023. His first season, they go 5-7. And last year, they bounced back with a nice 10-3 season. And this year, they're 7-1. So they're going to at least go to a bowl game again. So I do think that the recent history has been beneficial for Notre Dame on the field. And that'll be true again in 2025. You just need Notre Dame to beat them, obviously. And then you just need them to beat one of Memphis or South Florida. And then there's a good chance that Navy finishes the year 9-3, maybe 10-2, most likely 9-3. And you're like, that's a quality win. It won't be like a top 25 win, but it'll be a quality win. What you just need to have happen is you need Navy to avoid like a late season collapse. But they haven't really done a whole lot of that. So when you look at this, 7 straight wins, won 13 out of 14. I think they've kind of worked past the 07 to 2010 stretch, Trev, I think. But this is still a game that means something for Notre Dame and certainly means something for the Naval Academy, which also includes, people don't realize this, it also includes Marines. So there's a lot of guys that are at the Naval Academy go into the Marines, where Army, I believe, is just Army. I believe Air Force is just Air Force. There is no so guys who want to play football that are, in the Marines, a lot of them play for the Naval Academy. I didn't know that until when I worked at Muhlenberg College. A friend of mine, lady that worked there, one of the secretaries, great lady, but her son played for Navy, and he was in the Marine Corps. So he was an officer school. So the Naval Academy's officer school, but the officers for the Marine Corps, I guess some of them go to the Naval Academy, I believe. So yeah, I didn't know that till then. That was interesting.
That is very interesting. I learned that today at 2:36 p.m. So how about that? You learn something new every day, Brian.
Yep. And then this is awesome. Nicholas Grosh said, my father and 2 uncles graduated from Notre Dame's V7 program to become Navy officers and fight against Japan. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, that's real, man. Like, that stuff is real. Yeah.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for part 2 of today's show, but don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to talk about Navy as a football team. We're going to dive into their season as a whole, outlook, and then offense and defense. But before we get there, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly, greatly appreciate a 5-star review. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in the final segment of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, we are talking about the Navy midshipmen who Notre Dame hosts this Saturday night inside of Notre Dame Stadium. Like I said before, Notre Dame is 26.5-point favorites on FanDuel, but Navy enters this matchup. They started out the season winning 7 straight. They dropped last week's game against North Texas 31-17. And they're looking to bounce back as well. And like we always say, like we just talked about really in the last segment, Notre Dame is going to get Navy's best, and they get Navy's best every single time that they play because of the level of respect between these two programs. But this one is going to be an interesting one. Navy's had a very interesting year in some aspects. They've looked exactly like the team that we thought that they were going to be. And then in other areas, they've kind of fell short of what our expectations were of them preseason. So it's been a very interesting year for Navy.
It has, Trev, and we'll pull up the schedule and some of their stats and stuff as we kind of go through this. But you watch them and they continue to win, right? They're obviously 7-1, but just watching them live, Trev, they haven't been quite as good, in my opinion, or at least as impressive as they were a year ago. And that's something that I think. In one way, it's like it's not good, and in another way, it's like it's almost impressive because you haven't been as impressive as a team as you were last year, yet you keep finding ways to win. You keep finding ways to go out there and get it done, and so as we kind of pull up their schedule here, and you guys can kind of see what we're talking about here. But they start the season off with a big win over VMI. They have a sloppy but convincing win over UAB. They dominate Tulsa, but since then, Trev, a lot of scrappy close games. They had a 21-13 win over Rice, 34-31 win over Air Force, whose offense is really good this year. I still say people just don't appreciate how good Air Force's offense is this year. Air Force as a team is not good. They're 2-6, but their offense is scoring 33.9 points per game. That dropped down because they only scored 17 against Army this past weekend. But Army with a chance to, what is it, the Commander's Cup? Is that what they call it? The one that wins that, I forget what they call it, but that win over Air Force, obviously the winner of the Navy Army game once again is going to be the winner of that. Somebody in the chat can help me out with that. I'll bet you Tommy Guns knows that one. But then they had the win over Temple where they had to come back. They kicked a field goal at the end of the game to win that game. They beat a not very good Florida Atlantic team by 10. And then this past weekend against North Texas, they battled, they competed. They stayed in the game. They never let North Texas really blow them away, but you never really felt Commander-in-Chief trophy. It never felt like they had a shot to win it either. It just never felt like they were going to get enough stops of the North Texas offense to be able to win that game, and that put their own offense kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit, and they had some bad turnovers in that game and some missed opportunities. So Navy's I like the fact that Brian Newberry, they're 7-1 again this year. But they're in danger, in my opinion, of finishing really poorly because their schedule is very heavily loaded at the end. They've got the rest of their schedule, the last 5 games, North Texas, who's 8-1, 6-2 Notre Dame, 6-2 South Florida, whose only losses were to ranked teams, a ranked Memphis team, and then Army. So they're going to have to figure out some things here down the stretch, Trevor, to find some answers for just some of their inconsistencies on really both sides of the ball, but especially defense, because they're not as, to me, dynamic of a team as they were a year ago, at least prior to Blake Horvath getting injured. They kind of took a dip when he got injured last year, but they're not that team. I mean, remember, this is a team that a year ago, Trev, scored 41 in their opener against Bucknell, beat Temple 38-11, beat Memphis 56-44, scored 41 on UAB, 34 against Charlotte, 51 against 34 against Air Force, 51 against Charlotte. I think their quarterback got banged up a little bit in that game, hurt his hand. and hurt it even more against Notre Dame. They scored 14 against Notre Dame, 10 against Rice, 20 against USF, 0 against Tulane in the game he didn't play, or I think he might have played a series and then had to come out again. Then he finally got a little bit healthier, and they scored 34 and 31 against East Carolina and Army, and, of course, went and beat Oklahoma in a bowl game. This team doesn't look like that team. Their defense isn't as good, and their offense has been a little bit more inconsistent, in my opinion. But they're still dangerous, and they find ways to win, and you have to respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's no secret when you look at the schedule big picture as to why Navy has had some of the success that they've had and why they've struggled in some of the ways that they have. Look, I mean, any team that's not sniffing 500, Navy's absolutely decimated, which is what you should do when you're a quality football team playing inferior opponents. VMI is 1-8. They beat them 52-7. Tulsa is 2-6. They beat them by 19 points, 42-23. Then you start creeping up into some teams that are a little bit more quality on their schedule. Rice is 4-5. They're still sub 500, but Navy won by 8. You know, the one exception, the outlier is Air Force. And we talked about how good that offense is, and it's reflective in the final score. It's 34-31. Temple's 5-4. They're above 500. They won by a point. Florida Atlantic.
By the way, I got to say this, Trev. Casey Keeler's doing a heck of a job in his first year at Temple.
Yeah.
Like, really, he's a veteran coach, was at Sam Houston State. He was at Delaware. He was at Rowan back in the day, led them to the national title game against Mount Union. But I believe you guys remember Gus Ornstein. It was a quarterback that went to Notre Dame. Then he left Notre Dame. I think he transferred to Michigan State, and then it ultimately transferred to Rowan, played for Casey Keeler at Rowan. So it's a little bit of a nugget, but they're doing a heck of a job there. They're 5-4 this year, and they've got Army, Tulane, and North Texas down the stretch. They got a shot to be bowl eligible this season.
Yeah.
And they were bad last year. They were 3-9. Their only wins were over Tulsa, who was terrible, Florida Atlantic, and Utah State. And they got blown out. They lost by 48, 27, 8, 28, 9, 22, 46, 24, and 7 last year in their losses. And this year their losses have been to Oklahoma, Georgia Tech, Navy by a point. This past weekend they got smacked by East Carolina. But still, Temple's doing a nice job this year under Casey Keeler. So that was a good win, Trev.
Yeah.
But to getting back to your point, there's not a lot of those on their schedule.
No, Navy has the opportunity to right the ship towards the end. I don't expect them to beat Notre Dame, nor am I predicting them to beat Notre Dame, and that'll be reflective when we go over that on Thursday. But they have opportunities against South Florida and Memphis. And then, of course, whoever wins the Army-Navy game, that's another one of those where you just kind of throw out record. I mean, if you remember, last year we were talking about, Army has Bryson Daly. Navy's a good football team. Blake Horvath has been a little banged up, but I like the Black Knights in this one, and the Navy absolutely took him to the woodshed for the part of that game, man.
Yes, smacked them. Yeah.
But,
and then the year before, Trev, Army was not very good. Army was 5-6, and Navy wasn't very good, and Navy has come, but Navy was kind of playing better down the stretch, and then Army beats them, and it's been one of those games, man, where, like you said, you've kind of got to throw out the record a little bit when those two teams play. So it's one of those games that I always enjoy watching, which is funny because I'm someone who hates the triple option, but I love watching that game.
Sidebar, do you hate watching the triple option, or from a coaching standpoint, do you hate game planning for it, or is it just kind of all the above?
All of it. I hate game planning for it. I hated coaching in it. I hated playing in it. So my hate for the triple option started my last year of college. We brought in a new offensive coordinator who wanted to run triple option, and basically didn't want me to be the starting quarterback because I wasn't an option guy. I played shotgun the whole year basically before. And so I lost the starting job before we even put full pads on. And then we went out and played Bowie State in a scrimmage. I played really well. His freshman didn't. So we got in the first game of the year, and I'm trying my best to run the option, but we didn't really have an option offense, skill talent. So got that first game. We fell behind 20-0, and then threw two touchdown passes in the fourth quarter to bring us back. We got the ball back with 57 seconds left at our own 25 or 30. Let us down the field, threw a TD pass, went for 2, didn't get it, and then my career was over. I got benched after that. And so, because he was just first game we lost, I was going to be out, and he was going to put the freshman guy that he recruited there. So that kind of started it. but then just coaching D3, you see that offense a lot more, but I got them back though. Cause when I was coaching at CNU, I played my alma mater. We played that coach. That was the best season they ever had. They were undefeated. They were number 4 team in the country. We went to their place. I was a pass game coordinator. We threw for like 285 and beat them 35-24. So
come on now.
Yeah. So I got my payback on that one. And then just watching, just over the years, just watching this, because it used to be where guys would get hurt playing the triple option. Because it was, I thought, like not dirty football, like guys, but it was not football, in my opinion. It's the behind guys cuts and things like that. That's just not real good football. And then I coached in it for 2 years under a guy who's not the brightest bulb. You know what I'm saying? And so just overall, I have a lot of personal animosity towards it. But the reason I like Army Navy is because I like the triple option when it's triple optioning is triple option. It just makes me feel like I'm watching a game from the 50s. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm watching it. So like when it's because it's two very different versions of it. Yeah. It always has been. They're not running cookie cutter offenses. The triple option isn't like there's only one version of it. It's like with anything else. There's people run it all types of different ways. And so that's why I like watching it when it's those two teams, because they're both doing it. It just, to me, is more enjoyable.
Sure.
Because it's not like one team's trying to run modern offense and the other team's trying to slow the game down. It's like they're both doing that. And it just makes it more entertaining that way.
I get that.
So you talking about why I hate the triple option. You can see me just getting a little bit bitter about it. You know what I'm saying?
I see you getting a little bit fired up over there, man.
Yeah. So just
I get it.
Me off.
I don't like
it.
I got
my payback. I got my payback.
There you go. I'm with you. I don't like it either. We played Plymouth High School every single year. They were in the NLC with us, and they ran the triple option. And my junior and senior year, I think they had a left tackle and a left guard that both went to the Big Ten. I think one went to Wisconsin and one went to Nebraska. And it was every first down. We played the Plymouth Rockies, but they were also the Plymouth Indians, depending on the sport. And their football stadium was called the Rock Pile. And every first down, their PA guy would be like, "First down, Rockies." And you run the triple option, you get a lot of first downs because you're going 3 yards, 4 yards, 2 yards, 2 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards. Heard that quite a bit. And that's where my disdain from the triple option comes from. So not the same personal experience because my coach also asked me to run it, and I was not athletic in the slightest. I think you're being a little nice saying that you weren't an option quarterback in terms of athletic ability.
But I was athletic enough to play the option. My freshman year, I started for a ranked top 25 team at receiver.
Yeah.
I wasn't an option quarterback. I'd never done it before. I'd been mostly a shotgun quarterback, under center quarterback. I'd never ran a triple option play before. So it wasn't that I wasn't athletic enough. I was actually pretty good athlete. I just wasn't an option guy.
Oh, I could read it. I've just said it multiple times on the show. I have the mobility of an office chair on carpet.
So if we could have put us together, your ability to read the option, my ability to be my athleticism back in the day, we might have been a pretty good option quarterback. Still would have hated it.
We still would have had the same disdain, but we could have ran the heck out of it.
That's right.
For sure.
That's right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how Navy kind of runs the heck out of this, man. And we talked about Navy's kind of resurgence. And I would argue, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this, Brian. I think that Drew Cronick is responsible for a lot of the turnaround that Navy has had as a football team, because you look at what he's done on offense. And yes, they're still a triple option team. It just looks different than what it did during the Ken Niumatalolo era. And it's not, under center and full house backfield type deal. It's different.
Here's an interesting thing, Trev. I would not call them a triple option offense anymore. I'd call them an option offense. Because if you watch them play now, and it was trending that way for a while, even when they were a triple option team, they don't run the full triple all the time. But now even less so, because he sort of modernized it without losing the heart of what makes the option the option. You know what I mean? Like there was always a need for you have to be able to throw the ball more effectively in the option. There was always a need for that. It had to go that way. You couldn't just continue to be a team that passed for 60, 70 yards a game. Even with the great athletes like, Zach Abey was a pretty good athlete, but more so like the Ricky Dobbs, the Keenan Reynolds, the Malcolm Perrys, guys like that, right? Like, it still works better with those guys, but you're just, you're just not going to be able to do that, where you can just throw for 60, 70 yards a game. 2019, Malcolm Perry rushed for over 2,000 yards. He threw for 95. That was a pretty good season for them. The year before they were at 72.8. The year before that, they were 77.3. They threw the ball well under Will Worth in his 1 year as a starter. He threw for 128.1. But, I think the last couple years, you're seeing them be more effective throwing the football. They went from, in 2013, they were at 105.7. And they were at 6.4 yards per attempt. They were at 85.8 the year before that. 22 and 21, they were 56.5. Last year, they were jumped up to 123.8 total yards, but they went from 6.4 yards per attempt to 9.0 yards per attempt. And Blake Horvath completed 57.6% of his passes, which is a pretty good mark, especially how much they throw the football. And then this year, they're throwing for 149 yards a game, Trev, and he's got already has 1,143 yards in only 8 games. Last year in 12 games, he passed for just 1,353. This year in 8 games, he's 1,143. He's averaging 10.7 yards per attempt. Now, the INTs are a little high. He's thrown 5 picks this year, Blake Horvath has, but he's a much better thrower. But the reason that works for me, and he even has a 300-yard game. If you watch the Air Force game, they threw all over Air Force, which was wild. He went 20 of 20. It looks like a CJ Carr against what Purdue if they'd have played 4 quarters number. 20 of 26 for 339 yards, 3 touchdowns against Air Force. But the thing that makes it work though, Trev, is you can't throw the ball more effectively while sacrificing the quarterback as being a legitimate weapon in the running game. And that's what I think some teams have tried to tinker with. That was the issue that we had when I had to run this garbage offense at Defiance, was we didn't have the quarterbacks that were like really good weapons. And so we needed to be more of a passing team. And, the coach didn't understand that. And that had hurt us. So what I think that Drew Cronick understands is, yeah, you've got to be more modern in that your passing game needs to be a legitimate weapon where if you're not going to respect it, we're going to burn you with it. Our quarterback's going to go 9 of 13 for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns, and you're going to be in trouble. But you haven't lost the heart of who you are, which is still a quarterback, fullback driven offense. That's the big key. And what I think we've seen them do is understand, say, look, your slots have to be more dangerous as well. And so you look at their team now, Blake Horvath leads their team in rushing. He's got 926 yards and 13 touchdowns. So in 8 games, he's accounted for 20 touchdowns. He's accounted for well over 2,000 yards. He's averaging 6.7 yards per attempt rushing. He's averaging, 10.6 yards per attempt passing, 10.7. He's 10.7. He's still a legitimate rushing threat. And you saw what he did last year against Notre Dame. He had 2 big runs against Notre Dame last year. He's been over 100 yards each of their last 6 games, including 112 last week. And then you look at him in 2024, Trev, and the job that he did in 2024. He passed for 1,353 yards. He rushed for 1,246, 7.1 yards per carry, and he finished with 30 touchdowns in 12 games. So he's a very impactful quarterback. We saw him. What did he have? Was it like a 95-yard touchdown run against Oklahoma?
Sure did.
Ran for 196 yards against Army in the win over Army. So you still have to have that quarterback threat. And if you don't have that quarterback threat, your option's just not going to work as well. And when you've seen years where they haven't had, you can point to the years that Navy hasn't been very good. You can point to their quarterback position and be like, they weren't very good at quarterback. Every year. And it's not a coincidence. And so I think he's done a really nice job of kind of playing to that. And they've gotten better in that regard. That's helped Air Force. Air Force is averaging 185 passing yards a game this year. That's why their offense is better. They've had 3 games of over 200 yards. Now, again, their defense is not good. Their defense is pretty terrible. That's the same problem the Navy has. That's the risk you run, however, with this new modern form of the option is you don't necessarily go on the long, milk the clock drives that you used to because you're more explosive now. You may score faster now. But as I said, it's quarterback, fullback driven, and Alex Teska has 576 yards. He's their number 2 leading rusher, 4.6 yards per carry. But that was last year's numbers. He's already up to 523 this year with 5.8 per carry. He's got 6 touchdowns on the season. But the thing that I like about it, Trev, is they do more with their slot backs than what we've seen in the past. And in the past, the slot backs under Navy didn't do a whole lot. So if you look like their 23 team, for example, Eli Heidenreich was their leading rusher from the slot. He's a 214. They had 2 fullbacks and 2 tailbacks, or 2 quarterbacks ahead of them. You had Mikael Haywood in 2022 had 473 yards. The next highest slot back had 238, and that was in 12 games. 2021, similar deal. You had Carlinos AC. It was at 580. Their next highest was a 265. But the problem was, Carlos only caught 3 passes. So it was a little bit more one-dimensional, whereas if you look at the team this year, Brandon Chapman's he's got 360 yards rushing on 41 carries, 8.8 per carry, 2 touchdowns. He's also caught 13 passes for 124 yards. Then you look at Eli Heidenreich, who's got 49 carries for 342 yards, 7 yards a carry, 3 touchdowns. But he has 31 catches for 5 yards and 4 touchdowns. Because the way it was in the past is their slot backs would it catch the occasional wheel route or swing route, but they were primarily option backs. And you only really had to worry about the 2 outside receivers with any consistency. You just had to be disciplined. Don't let them beat you on a wheel route, things like that, right? Now, Eli Heidenreich will run legit routes. Like on one play, he's running a triple option or a jet sweep. The next route, he's running a post corner. He's running a drag and over. He's a legit wide receiver. It just gives them so many more options. I think so by getting the slot backs as a bigger part of the offense, which is needed if you're going to throw the ball more. I think that's what's made this Navy offense more dangerous if you're not locked into it, if you're not disciplined, because there's way more pass game options now beyond just the uncovered wheel route than what they used to have. And I think that can make it very challenging to defend.
Oh, yeah. They're also a really efficient offense. I mean, you look at Eli Heidenreich's, 31 receptions on the season, 22 of them have gone for first downs. That's really impressive. Really, really impressive. It's no secret who Blake Horvath's go-to receiver is when he drops back to pass. Same thing with Alex Tetska. I mean, yes, he's a fullback, but over a third of his carries have gone for first downs this season. They're very efficient at what they do. And those are the big 3, Brian. You mentioned them. Blake Horvath, Alex Tetska, and Eli Heidenreich. Those are the 3 guys. And Notre Dame is familiar with him because they all played against Notre Dame last season. They're a year more experienced. They're in year 2 of Drew Cronick's offense, and they're reaping the benefits of it. But one of the things that's handicapped this offense a little bit, in my opinion, has been the performance of the offensive line. They lost 3 starters from last year, and you mentioned some of the score differences between 2024 and 2025. Their offensive line has been a factor in that. They had to replace their left tackle, center, and right tackle from last season. Both of their guards returned. Both of their guards also happen to be the 2 bigger of the offensive linemen that they have. But that's been an issue. And then turnovers, shockingly enough, have also been somewhat of an issue for this Navy team. They're very efficient in everything they do, but taking care of the football hasn't been as big of a strength as it has been in years past. And that was an issue for them against North Texas as well. That was one of the reasons why the game was a 2-touchdown game. So Definitely been something to keep your eye on.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, and that's where Notre Dame is going to have to live. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, Trevor, but you're going to have to dominate up front. That's the big key. When Navy gets in trouble, it's because they can't get downhill. And to your point, when you play a good team like North Texas on the road and you lose the turnover battle 3-0, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah,
you're going to be in trouble because they're not Tulsa. You can lose the turnover battle to Tulsa and still win by 19. You're not doing that to North Texas. You're not doing that with Notre Dame. You're not doing that in Memphis and South Florida.
And that right there is really the 2 areas where Notre Dame has to thrive, to your point, in the trenches and then winning the turnover margin. One of the reasons why it was a 51-14 game last year is Navy turned the ball over 5 times.
6
times, excuse me.
Yep.
And
coming into that game, Trev, they only had 2.
Yep.
They had gone 5 games in a row without turning it over coming into that game.
I mean, you go and you look, and the size advantage that Notre Dame is going to have in the trenches is significant. I mean, their left tackle is 293 pounds. Ben Purvis is one of the returning offensive linemen for them. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. Their center, Cam Nichols, is a new starter. He's 6'1", 288. Hoke Smith, he's 6'3", 317. He's one of the returning starters. And
their guards are big boys.
They are.
2 guards are big boys. Ben Purvis has played a lot of football for Navy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, but the size advantage up front is where Notre Dame is going to have to thrive in this matchup. That's for sure.
And they just don't always play great together. Like, that's the thing about the O-line, Trev, is they don't always play consistently unified. Like, that's the thing, is if you understand triple option football, and you like, when you watch a lot of guys that love the triple option, like guys that played in it, coaching it, when they watch these games, they do nothing but watch the line. It's really fun to watch a really good triple option line. If you like triple option, it's just the way that they're playing, the angles, the different things that they do, they fuel a lot of that. This offensive line hasn't played to that level yet, and that's something that Notre Dame's going to hope that they can have to exploit this game. But you look at Navy overall, I mean, 27th in points per game, 16th in yards per game, second in yards per play nationally, 12th in plays of 30 yards or more. Obviously, you expect them to be up there in the rushing yards and the rushing numbers, but they're number 4 on third down. They're 24th in fourth down. They're second in the country in yards per pass attempt, second in the country in yards per completion. They're 18th in quarterback rating this season. They've only allowed 3 sacks all season. They're not great in the red zone, and they don't do a good job protecting the football. And that's something that Notre Dame's going to have to take advantage of. But that's also the side of the ball that if they're going to stay in this game, it's because their offense gets rolling.
Yeah.
Because their defense, Trev, is not that great.
I was just about to say, I mean, the offense is what's going to make this competitive for Navy. If they have any hope of trying to rip off an upset, this defense has to play significantly above the level that it's been playing at this season, but especially once they started playing quality opponents. PJ Volker has his work cut out for him, and I think a lot of their struggles go back to how much they lost. They lost 6 of their 11 starters from last year to this year, and some of the returners that they have some guys, they do, but some of the other ones, it's just, when you lose guys like Colin Ramos and Rayon Lane and Kyle Jacob, those are big shoes to fill on this defense, and it's reflective of where they're at here statistically. They're 64th in the country in points per game, 87th in the country in yards per play allowed. They rank outside of the top 100 in passing, in most meaningful passing statistics. Yards per attempt, they're 113th. Yards per completion, they're 108th. They don't do a good job at creating turnovers in the passing game. And then they do a relatively decent job at getting after the quarterback. But when you go and you look at the game log and like the breakdown of games, recently they haven't had a lot of success getting after the quarterback. That's been more, I guess, front-loaded on their schedule. You're muted.
This is what happens when I'm looking at stats and I'm trying to talk. I can't see the signal. But to your point, Trev, they have given up 19 sacks in 8 games. 5 of those they've had 19 sacks, in 8 games. 5 of those came against VMI. So over 25% of their sacks came in one game. They had 3 against Florida Atlantic, 2 against North Texas. But the problem is, Trev, when you look at this defense, is they have to pressure to get pressure on the quarterback. Like, they have to bring blitzes. And that's partly why they kind of get beat a lot, is because they have to blitz and get creative, and so they get caught a lot. And so that's something that's obviously been a problem, a little bit of a problem for them this year, to say the least, Trevor, is that there was a time where they had some legitimately good D linemen, good guys could really get after the quarterback. And in recent history, they've had really good linebacker play in recent year. I mean, it seems like, you had Carlos Ramos last year. Him and Kyle Jacob were good players. Year before that, you had Ramos and Will Harbor, who's a good football player. Ramos was a starter going all the way back to 2022. Yeah, Diego, I can't remember how to sound out his last. I think it was a Fago. I think is how you said it. I'm not touching that one. He was a heck of a player for them. He was a 4-year starter. So, they went through some stretches where they had really – Micah Thomas, remember him back in 16 and 17, was a really good player for them. But they don't have those guys in the front 7 that I look at like that. One guy they do have a couple good D linemen And they have a really rangy, athletic outside linebacker. Landon Robinson's a kid that you and I are both very high on. I had him on my all-opponent team last year. I don't remember if I had him on it this year or not. I did. He's a really good player for them. I mean, he's their Howard Cross. He's a really good football player. And, so far in 8 games, he got 7.5 tackles for loss this season, 5.5 sacks on the year. He's the guy, if you remember that big lineman that caught the ball against Army last year for the big play, that was Landon Robinson, one of their D tackles.
Yep. Really
quick, athletic kid. If you're not locked in, he can be really disruptive and give you a lot of problems. And he's a guy to keep an eye on. And I also like Luke Paris. He's an edge player for them. Florida kid. He's a little thin, so you can run at him, but he's very athletic, very disruptive. He'll do a lot of twists and stunts. He's a guy you've got to kind of keep your eye out on a little bit as well if you're them. But Landon Robinson this year has 23 pressures in 8 games, and he's got 10 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. So he's tied with Boubacar this season in total pressures, and he's only 2 hits plus sacks behind Boubacar, if that gives you any idea on what kind of player he's been. And then the Luke Pierce kid that I was talking about, Trev, he only has 15 pressures, but he's only rushed the quarterback 141 times because he drops back into coverage a lot. It's a very rangy kid. But in those 141 pressures, he's got 15 or 141 pass rush snaps. He's got 15 pressures.
Yeah.
And he's tied for second on the team in sacks plus hits on the quarterback. So if you took his pressure rate and gave him the same number of pass rush snaps that Landon Robinson have, he'd lead their team with 26 pressures. And if you took his sack plus hits on the quarterback rate and gave him the same number of pressures or pass rush snaps as Landon Robinson, he'd have 12 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So his overall numbers don't blow you away because he splits time between dropping in coverage and then rushing the quarterback, but he can be dangerous. And I'm very curious to see what Navy does this week because there's been multiple approaches to defending Notre Dame. That's what's been hilarious this year. It's how some teams like BC was like, we're just going to not let you run on us. Still went for 94 on 1 carry. But it was kind of like, hey, like we're going to come in and we're going to just put 8-9 guys in the box and just not let you run. And I've said this before, Trev, you can shut down somebody's run game if you want to. BC said, we're not going to let you run on us. So Notre Dame said, fine, then we'll just hit a bunch of bombs over your head. And they did. And, then we've had other teams who have oddly said, hey, we're, like USC said, hey, we're not going to let you throw on us and just let Notre Dame run all over them every game. And it's been kind of back and forth every week. NC State was like, we're going to shut down the run. We're not going to let you run on us. So Notre Dame threw for 342 yards. And so there's like a question that says, are you concerned about the consistency in the run game at this point in the season? And my answer is not really no. Because if you watch the games, you realize that they're basically saying, like, if you're just going to be dead set on stopping our run game, fine. We're just going to throw it all over you. They're not going to beat their head trying to run the football. And then also if you break down the game, and I'll have my run game breakdown up later, but Notre Dame wasn't overly efficient in this game, in the run game. They were sub 50% in efficiency in this game. But if you look at the play-by-play, Trev, they were inefficient on their last, let's see here. It was their last, I think it was their last like 5-6 runs. Their last 7 of their last 8 runs were inefficient. So it was after they had scored to make it 25-10, and they were basically just running the ball to run the clock out. So prior to that, so 7 of 8, prior to that, they were 10 of 18. So they were over 50% efficiency. So even though they didn't have the big runs, they were still very efficient running the football for a team that's put 8-9 guys in the box. The other thing, too, is if you look at those last, 8 carries, they had gains of 2, 0, -1, -2, 0, -6, and 2 because they were just running the ball to run the clock out. So you take those numbers away, that number that people point to looks very differently. So the point being, teams have kind of said, we're going to take one or the other away. And in almost every game since the opener, Notre Dame has burned them with the other side. What does Navy choose? because their run defense isn't that good, Trev. It's solid, but their pass defense is terrible. Can they afford to put numbers in the box and say, we're going to overload Notre Dame with numbers and then just let them get torched on the back end all game? Or are they going to say, hey, we need to maybe play the pass game a little bit and try to die 1,000 cuts, and then hopefully force Notre Dame to a mistake where we can rip the ball out or something like that, or we can have a pressure or an early rundown stunt that puts them in a different situation. They're going to be in a tough spot because their run game is solid, but it's not great. Their run defense is solid, but it's not great. They've kind of beat up on some bad teams. Gave up.
I was just about to say they have yet to play a rushing attack like Notre Dame's, and that's where I think that some of these numbers come from. Not to discredit what Navy has done on the season, because they did still face a triple option team and an Air Force that also gets factored into these numbers. Sure. And North Texas is in a slump on the ground, but neither of those teams have Jadarian Price. Neither of those teams have Jeremiah Love, and none of those teams have.
North Texas's run game is solid, Trev, but it's a complement to their heavy pass attack. I mean, they rank 46 in the country in rushing yards per game. They're 30th in yards per attempt, but they're what did I just say? 46 in yards, because it's a complement. You're defending the pass, and then they'll just gash you with some runs. They're not, like you said, Notre Dame, where they're just going to line up and say, we've got Jeremiah Love, we've got Jadarian Price, we've got this big offensive line. There's not a darn thing you can do about it. It's a very, very different animal.
I wonder if teams are going to start making the adjustment to, instead of trying to take away a phase of the game, they're going to start trying to take away portions of the field. Because you have to do something, right? Like, it can't just be, well, we're going to stop the pass today. It's like, against Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in this offensive line. Okay.
I honestly think, Trev, you're going to see more teams do what BC did. Just blitz, put 9 in the box, and hope that you can force them into some mistakes in the pass game.
Yeah. Like, you're going to have to go with whatever the less efficient option is.
Yeah.
And what numbers tell you is CJ Carr is completing less of his passes 20 yards down the field than he is, 10 to 19 yards down the field. And that's just, that's football.
That's true for most guys.
Yeah. That's
but he's
not
still
CJ
pretty
Carr.
good there. But if you're going to pick a death, that's the kind of the one you want to go to. Right. This is still a guy that a quarterback that, according to PFF, has hit 50 passes in 8 games that are beyond 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. 50. If you could look at Riley Leonard last year in 16 games, Riley Leonard hit 59 in twice as many games. So it's a very so that's the bind, that the burden that Navy has is, what do we do? Because their pass defense is awful.
Yeah,
they're not very talented in the secondary, and they blow a lot of coverages. So it's like, if you are going to go heavy run blitz, heavy numbers in the run game, you better hope you get to the quarterback.
Yeah,
because otherwise, and then Notre Dame's going to have some answers for those heavy pressures too, because they're gonna be willing to say, hey, look, you're going to beat us. This is why I think they're going to go numbers and be aggressive. If we just sit back, they're going to still beat us throwing the football. This way, we can at least hopefully take a page out of the 02 or the 22 playbook. Second half, remember, they started heating Notre Dame. Drew Pine torched Navy in the first half of that game. Torched them. They just started heating them up, bringing pressures from all over, and Notre Dame couldn't pick up the pressures, and they just started getting to the quarterback, and Notre Dame couldn't move the ball. And hope that they can force a redshirt freshman quarterback into some of the similar mistakes. An offensive line with two new starters basically into some mistakes. I think that's the only chance they have. And just say that it's not, we know we can't cover you, but we can't cover you if we drop 8 either. You know what I mean? And so we're going to take our chance by trying to create mistakes. So if I'm Notre Dame, I would be prepared for a lot of exotic blitzes this week, because that's already a natural part of what they do defensively. You know what I mean? Like, if you go back and look at what they do, Trev, under PJ Volker, in games where he doesn't think he has the talent of the other team, he gets very creative with his pressure packages. And it honestly, downright risky. But again, you have to. He doesn't have the talent to just sit back and play base defense. I'm not blaming PJ Volker for this. And they're also very small. It's a very small Navy front. Their front four is 263, 287, 273, and 217. Their starting D tackles, they're too deep at D tackle. 6 foot, 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", 287, 279, 273, 280. Their starting outside linebackers are 6 foot, 202, 6'4", 217. One of their starting linebackers, Coleman Cawley, 6'1", 233. Their other starting inside linebackers, 218 pounds. If they sit back and just let Notre Dame run at them, like the way that USC did, Notre Dame will run for 500 yards. I'm dead serious. Because they'll just physically overwhelm him. So the only hope he has is to just slant and twist all over the place. Knowing that the result could be some big plays, but that's the only chance that you have, in my opinion, is to do that.
Yeah, we see
their
that
defense
the same.
is just not good.
Yeah, we see that the same. I mean, that's why Notre Dame was able to gash him for a bunch of big plays last year in the run and in the pass game. I mean, one of Riley Leonard's better performances as a passer was against Navy last year, and it's just because their guys got isolated in coverage. And that was with guys like Ray and Lane, in the secondary. I mean, their only glimmering hope right now is, I think, their boundary corner, and it's Irabanoy Oniha, one of my favorite names. And, I mean, he's the better of the not good. He's 6'1", he's a $183. He's been targeted 27 times this season. He's allowed 13 receptions, no touchdowns, no picks. Also leads the team in passes defended this year. So he's their one hope in the secondary.
They will blitz their corners as well.
Yep.
Like a lot. Like they will I guarantee they'll bring corner fires on Saturday. Guarantee that.
They're going to have to try to find different ways, but I'm very curious to see, is Navy the team that finally decides to try to take away areas of the field and not just a phase of Notre Dame's offense, because teams have failed to do that week in and week out, trying to take away or limit the run and or the pass game. So that'll be very interesting to see. But, I mean, I know when we break these down, we talk about where the areas that Notre Dame has the advantage and where they match up well. And, I mean, I'd almost be remiss to say that they don't match up well across the board. I mean, in both phases.
I would argue, Trevor, that this is the biggest talent mismatch we've seen in this rivalry in a while. I mean, there was a time in the late teens at the end of Brian Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame where Navy had like legit Power 4 athletes in the secondary and up front. I mean, like on really all three levels. And that's why they had some of their better teams. I mean, we talked about that. I mean, heck, even in 16, receiver that, remember they had a Alohi Gilman started on that team. He was their second leading tackler. We know he was a legit Power 4 guy. Micah Thomas was a legit Power 4 guy. Sean Williams, DJ Palmore was a really good football player. I think it was 2008. Was it 18, 19? There was a year they had some really good DBs, but that 16 team also had some really good DBs. Obviously, not just Alohi Gilman, but I mean they've had some legit good, like talented defensive players. Rayon Lane, a couple years ago, actually was last year. Last year. But I remember the 22 game, like he was a legit Power 4 DB. Like legit, he could go play for some Power 4 teams. Like if he was at Notre Dame, he'd be in their rotation as safety, in my opinion. I don't know that he starts for Notre Dame because just athletically he lacks some of the overall skill that those guys had. But like he was legit, like he'd start for a lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule and got drafted. He was a 6th-round draft pick this past year of the Jaguars. So they just don't have that on their defense right now. They've had some really gritty, tough, smart, quality athletes at linebacker. Just don't think they have that right now. Their linebackers just, to me, don't run real well. The only guy that runs okay is 218 pounds.
Yeah.
And he runs okay because he's 218 pounds. They just don't have the athleticism that they've had, and that's a big problem that they're dealing with right now. And I don't know why that is. And is it tougher to recruit there than it has been? I don't know the answer to that, but that's something that they're going to have to figure out. They're going to have to up their overall talent level on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. The way that I look at this is outside of really one matchup, and it's Landon Robinson on the interior of Notre Dame's offensive line. In the run game specifically, this matchup is just as much Notre Dame on Notre Dame as it is Notre Dame on Navy, especially when it's Notre Dame's offense and Navy's defense. I mean, again, FanDuel has Notre Dame's over-under point total set at 41.5. Notre Dame is kind of coming up on the point where they could go 4 games in a row of hitting their under.
They better not in this game. Yeah. And this is a game where you should be able to continue being a big play offense But if this offense is going to reach its full potential, they have to be more consistent between big plays. And that's where they've been very inconsistent. Eliminate some of the dumb plays, the dumb mistakes, the dumb penalties, the blown assignments that result in tackles for loss, all that kind of stuff. You're going to have to be a little bit more efficient than what you were your last couple games. And the good news is Navy's right for that. But so was Boston College, and they didn't take advantage. So you hope that they're a little bit more locked in this week. And they were able to maybe last week, hopefully they were just a little bit rusty and you needed to shake some of that off. I don't know. But, this Navy team is one that even compared to last week, their talent level is inferior to what BC had last week, especially up front. And that's a concern for them. And that's where Notre Dame's got to take advantage. North Texas certainly did.
Yeah, sure did. And
Notre Dame's going to have to do the same thing. So, because I actually like PJ Volker as a defensive coordinator for that level. He's a good defensive coordinator. You can just see he's like, how do I protect not having good players? How do we protect ourselves not having good players this year? And it's tough. It's a tough spot to be in. So they're going to have to figure out a way to upgrade their talent level on that side of the ball and get it back to the way it was sort of at the end of the Niumatalolo era. And I think part of that is because I don't think he recruited real well after COVID either. I mean, we've seen different stats that prior to 2024, enrollment numbers in the military had gone way down. We had reached like very low levels in enrollment in the military for various reasons. And that's going to affect the Naval Academy, and that's going to affect the Air Force, and it's going to affect the Army. And so what you saw was the guys that finished their careers last year, a lot of them were kind of part of that before there were some of those issues that led to some of that. And then there was like a little bit of a lull where I don't think any of the academies were able to recruit as effectively. And that's why they're all kind of down this year, because they all lost a bunch of fifth-year seniors off their team from last year. Guys that were like pre-COVID guys, and and then now they're all taking a step back this year. Army's taking a big step back. Navy's taking a big step back, because I think they lost a lot of those veteran players, and they didn't recruit as well in 20 and 21, 22 and 23. And so they're not able to just restock the way they have been able to do in the past.
Agreed. And I'm with you. Hopefully they can find a way to get more talent on the defensive side of the ball, because I'm with you. I do like PJ Volker as well.
Yeah.
Folks,
I think they have good coordinators. I really do. It's just going to come down to, can they recruit the way they need to?
Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I do believe that super chat from John Emerson. Thank you for the super chat, John. I'll be at the Navy game. Are you guys tailgating?
So we won't be tailgating, John, but what I'll most likely do, as long as it's not raining, is I'll probably get there, and we'll probably do like a little bit of a meet and greet on campus. I'll probably meet at a spot somewhere near the stadium, either between the stadium and the library, or somewhere near the Joy slot, where I'll kind of hang out for 30 minutes or so if anybody wants to meet up. But we won't be doing a tailgate this weekend. My wife's going to be out of town, and my parents aren't here. So it would literally be just me. And just me planning a tailgate would make for a sucky tailgate. Very sucky tailgate. Plus, I'd have to break it down like 2.5 hours before the game starts.
Yeah.
So that would suck too. But no tailgate this weekend, John. But I do appreciate your super chat very much, dude. Appreciate you.
Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Here in about an hour and a half, the guys are going live on IB Nation Sports Beat, and then the first playoff rankings come out tonight. And Brian's going to be going live on the CFP Nation channel right when that show kicks off, a little bit before. And then we're going to be going live on the Irish Breakdown channel once he's done over at CFP Nation to kind of give our Notre Dame thoughts, and then obviously our overall thoughts on that as well. But before you head out of here, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the CFP Nation channel. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until later this evening, and that's Brian, I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.